Hello, Mr. Mechanic. Welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming in. Despite it not being memorable to you, we met in Madeira.
Yeah, I didn't remember Madeira, but I remember meeting you.
Preston Pish was there. He said, you have to get Bitcoin Mechanic on your podcast. And I listened to the episode you did with him. I don't listen to many Bitcoin podcasts. I really enjoyed it. And as I said to you before, I've gone full circle. And I think I'm at the point now of I want Bitcoin to be the best money. That's what I'm here for. This is the mission. I don't really want to be making shows about ordinals. We'll cover it, but I wouldn't be making a show kind of telling people why they're so cool. Quantum cats and that shit. So I think you're going to be a very good person to talk to about this because of everything that's been happening in Ocean as well.
Yeah.
What is your background? Because I don't know it.
You mean like my Bitcoin background or just like, so I got into Bitcoin around 2011, thanks to, I think it's 4 people I really credit with. Max Kaiser, because I was in London at the time. I was at Occupy London Stock Exchange, which was the London version of Occupy Wall Street. And Max Kaiser was just doing the Kaiser report, and he was like an alternative economist, and all he was doing was talking about Bitcoin. So, I mean, fast forward 10 years, and I got to meet him and thank him and all that stuff. But really, it was him. But it was also Julian Assange and Ross Ulbricht, and then, just after that, Andreas Antonopoulos, and then it became evangelical, like immediately because of Andreas. Like suddenly it all clicked, and I'm like, I love this thing. And then, from late 2011, I was just absolutely obsessed with it. So that was my intro to Bitcoin, and basically it just kept getting more and more intense as a passion. It never really was a thing that dwindled.
So what does it mean to you? Why are you so passionate about it?
Separation of money and state. It's just fantastic. It's undeniable. And it's frictionless as well. So, I can send money to anyone, any size of it, any size. It doesn't matter if it's sending $1 billion or, $20. It's the same thing. It's going to be treated as equal, right? So love that neutral money, dumb money that doesn't, cast judgments on what's going on, which is going to sound inconsistent given what we're going to get into. But I'm pretty sure I can reconcile the whole thing. So, yeah.
Well, listen, we're in a period we call a bull market. We're seeing the stats change, show numbers are going up.
Oh, sure.
And there's going to be new people coming in. And so we're very conscious at the moment of reminding guests that, some of the people listening won't know a lot of the things we're talking about, won't understand it. And, we tend to try and be the show a little bit more for the beginners or the less technical. So I want to get into these topics with you because they're really important, but I also want to get into it in a way that makes it easy for people to understand. And I had a whole bunch of prep and how we were going to do this. And then I listened to your show with Preston, and I thought, a fantastic show. I don't want to just repeat that show. But I also think it might be a good place to start this is just do a TLDR on how Bitcoin works. So because there's going to be some people coming in and they're going to bought their first Bitcoin and maybe they've left it on an exchange. Or maybe they've moved it to a wallet, but they don't really know how it's moved. And they don't really understand how mining works. So they don't really know what the blockchain is. We don't spend too long on it, but I think that's a good primer for the bigger questions we're going to get into.
Yeah, it's hard. That's a lot. I could go on forever on that, right?
I'll help you. I'll tell you where I think explaining what it is as a decentralized protocol. I think explaining how it maintains decentralization, and then I think more importantly, what happens when you send Bitcoin. So say I send some Bitcoin to you on the base chain, what's happening in the background?
Yeah, so I think just jumping in randomly, I look at it, my favorite analogy for it has always been using language as a metaphor. So you have the English language, and the reason it's worth learning is because loads of other people speak it. And the reason it's resilient is because when authorities try to change the meaning of words and stuff like that, like, woke culture tries to redefine things and, The reason it doesn't work so well is because you have all these enforcers of the rules of the English language. That's every English speaker. So you've got billions of them, right? Whereas if there was a language that only 10 people spoke, that would be very different, right? Even though in theory anyone could learn it and it could be another effective communications medium, if those 10 people met in a room one day and said, all right, we're redefining a bunch of words, that would just be the language changing, right? Whereas, not to get political, but if you have someone come along and say, oh, men can have periods and things like that, you have a billion people that will laugh at you and go, that's nonsense. And that you can't really do anything about that because no one's in charge of English. There's a lot of effort that has to go into changing the definition of words, right? Like that's half of what 1984 is about, is redefining words and deleting words and all that. And it requires a lot of energy. So if you want to change the rules that the Bitcoin network has, you have to contend with that. You have to contend with the fact that these rules are widely enforced. And that's what gives you your reliability. That's why when we say there's only 21 million Bitcoin, the reason for that is you have to ask, well, most people come into it and they go, but who says there's only 21 million? And I'm like, well, you do and I do, depending on whether you're running nodes or not. That's where the enforcement comes in. And the point is we got enough of those nodes, which are like the speakers of the language, to credibly say, yeah, we're decentralized. Go and find all 50,000, 100,000 nodes and make them agree to have more than 21 million, which means agree to dilute your savings and make your life savings worth less. I've got to make all of you people, tens of thousands of you, agree to devalue your own money. It's just never going to happen game theoretically, practically. If there was only one person running a node, then you're back to Federal Reserve land. That's what crypto does as well. It piles on features and features to try and compete with Bitcoin. But as a result, you don't have anyone. You can't enforce the rules personally anymore. You can only abide by rules set by someone else. So you're back in fiat land. That's why we've kind of fiat leapfrogs over into crypto, and they're exactly the same thing. Small group of people enforcing a set of rules. Bitcoin is the exception to all that says we're going to do something simple and dumb enough that enough people can enforce it. So to bring it back to that language analogy, you have you make something that's a language that's easy enough for a 2 or 3 year old to learn and speak, and then you've got a hope in hell of enough people learning this thing that you suddenly can't control what people do with it.
That's quite abstract, though.
Yeah,
it's
sorry
good.
about that.
No, I like it. It's an analogy I will use in the future. It's quite abstract, though. I think what I was probably more getting at is helping people understand who are new to this that while Bitcoin is a ledger, that it exists in tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of nodes, and why that has to be that way.
So in order to get more data into Bitcoin's ledger, you've got to meet an incredibly high burden. First off, this widely enforced set of rules says, here's how high you've got to jump to be able to meet that bar, which is an incredibly high bar, and it gets higher and higher and higher. And that's pretty much it. That's the proof of work requirement, because you can't, that's like the currency of the universe. Sorry to be abstract again, but you can't fake energy. No politician can write on a piece of paper, there are more gigawatts in this town now. Like if there's a blackout, there's a blackout. We just don't have the power, right? So when people are consuming energy, performing the proof of work that the network requires to add blocks to the blockchain, you can't outcompete that by saying, no, that's the wrong chain. We need to make the right chain that has a different set of transactions in it and gives all the new coins to me instead of you. You have to outcompete them with your consumption of energy, and you can't fake that. No politician can do that. Like that's the scam of fiat, right? Is that you can print $1 million without that representing someone having done $1 million worth of work in any capacity. Like no one earned it. It doesn't reflect anything real. All it does is just make there be more dollars, versus the same amount of work. So what does that mean? Everything gets more expensive. That's what inflation is. That's why you can't inflate Bitcoin. So I don't know if I'm even remotely talking about what you prompted me to talk about. But
No, not really.
Yeah, sorry, man.
But we can work through it. I think what I'm trying to get to is we're going to have people listen to this show who are very, very new to Bitcoin. We're going to start talking about spam.
Right.
And then we're going to start talking about block construction, and we're just going to talk about how getting transactions into a block. But I think for some people, they won't even fully understand what the blockchain is. They won't fully understand the structure of Bitcoin and why it was designed in the way it was. I think most will understand it's decentralized and it's online. And lots of people understand all of this, by the way. They'll probably be like, Pete, just get onto the juicy stuff.
Right, yeah.
But I think to preempt getting into the discussion around Bitcoin being money and why we have to maintain that, why that's an important property to maintain, I think there's going to some people need to understand how it works. So, for example, say I send some Bitcoin to you, all I have to do is put in a string of characters that represents an address. I say how much Bitcoin I'm sending, and I probably pick a fee rate I'm happy with. I click send, and I know at your end, you're going to see that transaction. It's going to exist, okay? But if I was new to this, I would just, I'd perhaps just do it and not even think about it. But we're taking them down a path now of explaining to them and getting some detail. So it'd be good to explain actually what's happening at that point. Talk them through that.
Sure. So I guess it helps to compare it with what you're used to with sending money in any other context, right? So if I send you like ACH or like faster banking or faster payments, whatever the UK system's called, right? Like what happened when I sent you money is my bank account is the authority. It says, like, if it's HSBC or whatever, it says, all right, mechanic had that 20 quid and we're sending it to this account with this name, matches the thing. Okay, that 20 quid no longer belongs to this guy, it belongs to that guy because we said it was the case and that's it, right? But you're asking for permission from that person and there's a whole bunch of, validation that's going on behind the scenes. It's all kind of fox in charge of the hen house. Like, is it real money? Did they just print it out of thin air? Who knows? But the point is, it's an authority permission-based system. If someone that isn't me, that isn't a UK citizen, for example, wants to use that system, they can't. Like, they're denied entry to it. Like, they're going to say, who are you? Do you have a bank account? No, you don't. Like, where's your ID? You need permission to use it, right? So Bitcoin's permissionless network. So I can fire up a node without being anyone. As long as I have some connection to the internet, it doesn't matter who I am or what my citizenship is. I can fire up a node, connect to the network. The network doesn't demand any credentials. It has no concept of, ID or any of that stuff. I can sync up to the network and I can get a complete history of the network. So I know where every single sat, which is the smallest unit of, how big the currency or any UTXO can be. I was trying to avoid using that word, but
that's fine.
I know. So, when you send me money on that, first off, you didn't need permission to do it. And second off, you're not contending with an authority figure that says, oh, I'm not going to let you spend that today, or it's a weekend or something like that. It's just, is it valid? Is it not valid? And if it's valid and what you're doing is appealing to a miner because they are not slaves, they will put into the chain what they feel like putting into the chain. That's why transaction fees exist. They don't have to put anything in. So you send your transaction, you upload it generally to the network. It spreads around everywhere. All of the nodes pick it up. They're interested in it. A miner says, all right, there's some fees there. I'm going to put that in a block. That earns me some money. That block then gets sent around the network. And at that point, I download the block and I look at it and say, oh, that's one of my addresses. It just got some Bitcoin. And I don't necessarily know where it came from, but I know the history of all the sats contained in it because I can trace it back all the way to the beginning. You have an entire history of the network. So I don't need a bank. I don't need an authority figure to say, this guy really had the money. Instead, I have to verify the entire history of all of the money that's ever existed in this system. And as a result of that, once I've done that, I know you really had it to spend. Everyone else knows you can't spend it again because that would be double spending. And that's what Bitcoin is all about solving. How do you stop people spending the same money twice? How do you definitively say he spent it? He sent it to that guy before he sent it to that guy. We're all separated by time and space. How do you know which one is truly first without an authority figure? That's where the proof of work requirement comes in. Because even if you send it to me and you send it to him, if you send it to him first and me second, if the one where you send it to me ends up inside the blockchain, that's the one everyone is going to respect. Because in order to rewrite history and say, no, it really went to him, you have to consume all that energy to find a different block that has a different version of history. And no one's going to do that. So in a practical sense, we solve double spending. It doesn't solve it theoretically, but no one's going to change the history of where that money went without consuming a whole lot of energy and undermining the whole system and making everyone lose confidence in it. Again, making the value of the thing they're invested in tank. So why would they even do it? Well, I hope that's a reasonable answer.
It's good. And up until, I mean, I can't remember exactly when, but I'll just say about a year ago, all I really thought about with Bitcoin was I'm going to be sending and receiving to a base chain address or sending and receiving to a Lightning address, and a certain amount of Bitcoin or Satoshis would go back and forth. That's all I thought about. That's all I cared about. And we were out there making shows, traveling the world. We were on this mission of providing interviews with people for education about good money. And at some point about a year ago, we started to see NFTs, JPEGs, whatever, come to Bitcoin. And since then, a whole bunch of stuff. BRC20s, ordinals, inscriptions, all this stuff, which I don't fully understand because I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I have no interest in it. I'm never going to buy it. I'm never going to recommend it to anyone. And at first it was just, I kind of felt like a little bit of a passing fad. Now it feels like something that's become all-consuming within Bitcoin. It's led to discussions, debates, arguments, a new mining pool, which is considering it spam. And some people would say censoring, some saying blocking out. I know you've got arguments why it isn't censorship, but we're now in this place. And by the way, Danny and I are definitely not in 100% agreement on some of this, and so expect Danny to also chime in with some of his views and questions. But we are at that point now where there's almost a question about what is Bitcoin. Some people say it's money and we should make sure it's the best money in the world. Some people now say, no, it's a protocol where you can just move data around, and one of those things is Bitcoin, but it can be any arbitrary data. I'm definitely in the same camp as you now.
Welcome.
Definitely. But I want to help other people listening to understand that point of view, because it's there's a split in the camp.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not altogether organic, the split. Like most of the time when people, there are really two arguments against my position. I'm trying to, because we've gone super basic for the beginning. I don't want to go straight to the like Bitcoin Twitter nuanced drama with like one like on every tweet with a horrendous thread that goes on for a month. Like that's going to be alienating to most of what you're saying your audience is. But it sounds like I have some opposition here as well. That's very useful.
It would probably be light opposition, but yeah.
No, well that can help, right? Because I don't want to preach to the choir so much, because really I think my arguments are sound and they hold water. And I find myself once a week going through it from first principles going, am I wrong about this thing? Because I really deeply care about Bitcoin and I don't want to be on a crusade for something that ultimately is a bad idea.
I would say rather than opposition, it's more I just have questions.
Yeah, sure. But so, I mean, when it comes to, very basically, conceptually, you can have a thing be good at a thing, or you can have it be crap at several things, which is, like you don't try and make a jack of all trades thing. Like Bitcoin is incredibly good at one thing. And we've historically been hostile to it opening itself up to other use cases. And it was never considered, censorship, to say the worst, or just negative in any capacity. So we've got old posts from Vladimir, legendary Bitcoin Core contributor, and Satoshi himself. But, I'm going to steer clear away from that because it's kind of cringe making appeals to Satoshi. Who else? You have Jeff Garzik before he sort of went, went a bit crazy during 2014 era. You have Luke, of course, who I work with at Ocean. And you always had his hostility towards arbitrary data storage, but you eventually had some kind of acceptance of it in the form of op return, which was, if you guys are going to insist on storing arbitrary data in Bitcoin's blockchain, can you do it this way because it causes the least harm to the nodes? And I'm very glad we started with the explanation of Bitcoin talking about nodes. These are the enforcers of the rule set, right? They're the speakers of the language. And the more of them there are, the more reason you have to learn the language, because it's going to be useful to you if millions of people speak it. So what you don't want to do is place additional burden on them and treat them as a sort of freebie public resource. Say, hey, if you speak English, you now need to do all this extra stuff. that's of no use to you whatsoever. All you're doing is creating disincentives for people to do it. And they're incredibly useful, and they're what makes Bitcoin unique. I asked this on Twitter like a month ago, saying, why is Bitcoin not a shitcoin? Sorry if you have to beat that out or whatever.
No, we don't.
No, we don't.
All right, good.
I say,
You
I
say
swear a lot.
naughty words, do you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, well, yeah, why is Bitcoin not a shitcoin? For me, there's like a whole bunch of sort of metaphysical reasons for it, and like, you know, social coincidences and sort of, what do you call them, Goldilocks elements, right? But for me, it's nodes. Because running an Ethereum node, running a Solana node, running all that stuff is horrendously expensive, and it's the community is, and their priorities are defined by people not caring about that element of it. They just want more features. They want more interesting stuff. They want to do this, they want to do that, and they want to do the other. Bitcoin doesn't want to do any of that, because if you only do money, you can just about keep the system credibly decentralized, and then you don't turn into Federal Reserve 2.0. If you want to start adding features, first off, the benefits are usually way overblown. It's someone that wants to sell you a picture of a banana or something like that, or a frog in this case, that's telling you it's going to change everything about how assets work and all this stuff. And we know it's, as you say, it's a passing fad. It's going to go. The trouble is they iterate and it turns into a new thing, and each one dies, but you constantly have, you know, the deeper method of what they're doing remain. So I'll lose my trail of thought here.
Well, let's just go back a touch then. So what was happening prior to op return?
Well, forgive me, I don't know the history as well as I should. But
Or explain what an opcode is and what op return did.
Op return is basically a pragmatic response to you can say don't store arbitrary data in the blockchain or Bitcoin's blockchain. And actually that was sufficient in most cases. Most of the devs that wanted to do this stuff, you know, the experimenters, they went off to Ethereum and all the other chains that were conducive to that, because those are catering to features. You know, Ethereum wants to do everything on the blockchain, right? And that's its selling point versus Bitcoin. And fair enough to it. It's about experimentation, and, you know, it's not trying to be sound money that needs to last centuries. It's just move fast, break things. Fair enough, that's valid if you like. I would never invest in anything there because I don't consider it reliable. But that was always enough to make devs go, all right, I'm going to go and work over here where I'm appreciated, right? And there was always be a little bit of resent and pulling the smoke alarm on the way out of the door, like, screw you guys. Like, but nevertheless, a forum post from Vladimir saying don't store arbitrary data here was enough to get rid of these guys. But for whatever reason, people carried on doing it, and the various discussions in the space led to the development of op return. And op return was saying, all right, there are ways to store arbitrary data. Some of them are really bad, like bloating the UTXO set. Some of them are less bad, and some of them are provably prunable, which is what op return is, where you can make a fake output essentially with no sats going into it. You can put sats in it if you want. You shouldn't, because they'll never be spendable. And what that means from a node's perspective is I can prune all this data off my node. I never need it. So it doesn't place additional burden on the nodes. You're saying, please just stick it in here where nodes never need to care about it. You still need to spend sats doing the transaction in the first place to get it in the blockchain, but you can send sats to yourself and then add an op return as well with no sats in it, and that can just be a simple message. Like, I know you knew Keith Levine, and so when he passed away, me and Toma put an op return tribute to him in the chain, right?
Love that.
So I'm not saying I've never done it, and I'm not saying there's no methods to do it, but this was the result. This was the consensus of the Bitcoin community saying, here's the least harmful way to put data in the chain. It's still not what it's for, but, you know, by default, it was originally 42 bytes or something. I'm going to get this wrong, so feel free to scream at me, people that know better. But that's enough to put a hash of whatever you need to run an entire sidechain. You can do that just with the default old size of op return. It's bigger now in Bitcoin Core. It's what it used to be in Bitcoin Knots, which created a whole bunch of drama as well. We'll get into that. But that's what op return does. It says, if you guys are going to do this, please do it this way because it causes the least harm. But again, it just demonstrates that no one ever went, well, that's censorship. We should open up Bitcoin and be as kind as possible to arbitrary data storage methods because that would be just great. And we can have more development and more interest, and we can bring different kinds of people into Bitcoin. All these sort of, you know, ridiculously idealistic arguments that are really just, you have to, whoever it is that's talking about it's always got an ordinal to sell you, and you're like, well, is it really that useful? So that, that was basically the history of it. We said, do it in here if you absolutely must, because it's not going to hurt us, like using bare multisig does, where it's like unprunable outputs that are being used. That was a thing called stamps, which was its own maliciously devised spam.
Stamps.
Yeah, this was one of the kinds of
That was recent, wasn't it?
Yeah,
That's
this is
Mike.
Yeah, Mike in Space.
Yeah, Mike in Space.
So, I mean, I call it malicious. He openly is attacking with it. He said in a podcast, like, oh, the inscriptions guys are not being as annoying as they could be. I'm going to do it in bare multisig outputs just because that's even more harmful to the network. Like, this is a quote.
Yeah.
And so when I'm, like, arguing with people, I'm saying this stuff is being done as an attack. I'm like, the guy who's doing it openly declares it an attack. So, I mean, like I say, there's annoying ways to do it. There's medium, moderate ways to do it. And then there's the least harmful way to do it. But the overall point is we have a long history in Bitcoin of saying this is for storing data about financial transactions. It's just a ledger. Like when you're looking, 100 years ago, you got your book of like your spending and your budget and all that. You don't want your kid coming along and doodling in it, because just use another piece of paper. Yeah. Like it's just that. Like we all have to store this thing for the rest of eternity. Can you not fill it with like dick butts and silly stuff like that? Again, though, I don't want to focus on what the nature of the arbitrary data is. It's just like even if you want to store, the most wonderful, if you want to store WikiLeaks data in there or whatever, history you want to preserve forever, it's still not what Bitcoin's for. There are actual platforms for this stuff.
And in OpReturn, could you store enough data for a JPEG previously if you wanted to?
So it depends. Complicated question. By default, there is no limit to how big an OpReturn can be in a block. But there is a limit to how big it's allowed to be for a node to accept it and relay it around the network. And this is where you get into how Ocean works. Because you have what's allowed in a block by consensus rules, then you have a tighter set of rules, which is what's allowed around the network before it makes it to a miner. And that's a tighter set of rules. And I mean, I don't even know where to start with this, but you can have an OpReturn that fills up a whole block, but it's never going to make it to a miner. You have to make that manually and then give it to a miner directly, because the nodes are not interested in relaying that around, because why would they be? It's not helpful to them in any sense. It doesn't help Bitcoin function as the kind of money we want it to be. It's just someone trying to store data, and we've got a limited amount of space we can use. It needs to be for the purpose we designed it for. So generally, nodes have had this thing called default policy, which is here's the kind of transactions we want to see in blocks. Not, there are other reasons for it, DOS protection and stuff like that, but nodes have had these default policies that are set by Bitcoin Core or Bitcoin knots as well. A lot of people use that. And those policies inform what ultimately makes it to miners and then makes it into blocks. So if you want to make it like a 100 kilobyte OpReturn, for example, that's not going to make it into a block unless you are a miner yourself or you have a direct channel with a miner. If you want to use the whole P2P network, you need to fit within the rules generally that they enforce as default policy, not just what's consensus. That happens after the block is found.
But miners have started accepting the out-of-band transactions. Like Marathon have just launched something, I think it's like a website where you can submit an out-of-band transaction.
Precisely. So Luxor were the first to do it. They made that giant block, right, that was just a JPEG,
the 4 megabyte
right?
block.
A great example, because that would never have made it around the network. That was a deal made between the wizards, I guess, and Luxor privately, right? No one knew about that until it was found. I think that was sort of the intention of it. And unsurprisingly, some of their miners were pissed off about it, because you are stewards of the chain to some extent. You're not supposed to do stuff.
So you think they have like a fiduciary duty to the miners in that pool?
You mean the pool has a fiduciary duty to its hashes, you mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's an ethical responsibility. Like, okay. I don't think a pool should... It's a complicated question. That's not a yes or no answer, really. I think ultimately the responsibility is on the people in the pool to demand transparency from their pool.
Yeah.
So at the moment, no one even expects that, which is kind of what Ocean blew out of the water, right? Because we came up with transparent templates. We said, here's what the next block will be. If you don't like it, or here's how you can mimic the policies of it. Here's roughly what the next block's going to look like. You can mimic this on your node. If you don't like it, take your hash away before the block gets found and added to the blockchain. Don't find out after, which is, some of the miners that hopped on Ocean told us specifically that's what they were doing because they were annoyed about it. Like, why?
Why were they annoyed about it?
Because you're contributing your work towards something you don't approve of, that you've made a bunch of assumptions about that the pool didn't fit with. And that's a lack of communication at best. It's deceptive at worst, probably somewhere in between those.
But didn't they just get paid anyway?
Well, I mean, the blocks either side of that one block were like $5,000 in fees, and the Luxor block with just the JPEG was like $200 in fees.
Oh, I see.
So in theory, though, they were paid out of band to do it. That's what's claimed. I've never seen any proof of it, and there is no proof because it's not in the blockchain. It's a fiat payment. Even if that happened, how as a miner are you supposed to verify that you're getting any of that transaction fee revenue that got paid out of band? There's no real way to verify. You just need to trust. But if you get the money, you get the money. And in theory, you're happy if it equals the blocks either side of it. You assume that they rolled straight dice.
Block?
Luxor.
Luxor mined it themselves.
Yeah. Well, no, Luxor constructed the template and its hashes solved it, but the hashes don't know what they're working on. And we use this analogy of like blindfolded pyramid builders. They don't know the final product they're working on. They're just following orders. And it might be the case that they really don't want to build a pyramid, but that's what the architect designed.
Yeah.
And this is why I call them hashers rather than miners, because they're not a part of the mining process. They're not intentionally adding specific things to the blockchain.
Okay, so what you're saying is those people who are contributing their hashes to the pool, their payout was lower than it would have been because Luxor constructed this block in a way that had less fees.
In theory, yeah. But apparently, Luxor then made them whole out of band and split the revenue, because Luxor don't want to do it either, right? They don't want to annoy their miners. There is something a bit underhanded about what they did. And the way to reconcile that with their miners is say, don't worry, we got paid to do this and here's your split. The problem is there's just no ability to verify. But this is only one example of that with how mining generally works at the moment. Miners generally, hashes are just sort of, there's no way to verify anything. And, if you're new to Bitcoin, there's this phrase, don't trust, verify. And there's very little of that going on in mining at the moment.
And would you say your position is, let me put what I think your position is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the world of block construction, the ideal world is that a block is constructed as the most efficient block based on fees, and there's really no arbitrary decisions about including and excluding transactions. It just goes to the mempool, and essentially all miners constructing blocks, doesn't matter which miner it is, should essentially construct the same block, and therefore it's a fairer system. And sorry, let me throw into that. And then when miners are arbitrarily choosing transactions or providing it as a service, it's essentially creating some skewed incentives for how mining operates.
So I think miners need to respect what nodes are instructing them the chain should look like, right? They have done forever. That's why we didn't see 100 kilobyte op returns filling up blocks, because nodes were generally indicating to miners, we don't want this stuff in there. So that's why the spam, when it finally took form, was using things that nodes would accept and relay around, because the nodes, the default implementation just basically has a bug in its spam filters, which happened, I'm not going to say Taproot because Luke will, reprimand me after this, because it's not literally Taproot's fault. All this stuff was possible before. But look, so to describe exactly how I think it should work with, the whole dynamic of what goes in the blockchain, nodes should indicate what's useful to them. They should say, hey, miners, these are the things we want to see in the blockchain. And miners should just respect it when they construct the template. And that's it. So when you just mentioned Slipstream, which is Marapool's service for soliciting out-of-band transactions. Now, I think it's a parallel to what they did a year or two ago when they started doing what was it called? OFAC compliant blocks, right? So that caused a shitstorm, right? because for good reason, right? They're trying to say we're going to let not just the nodes inform us about what goes in the blockchain, but we're going to let government policy about who is allowed to spend money and who isn't also inform our templates. So that's nuts, right? And Bitcoin rightly gave a massive backlash about it, and they stopped doing it. So the point is, if you go down to the root of it, what should a miner be doing? A miner that cares about the long-term integrity of the Bitcoin network, which it should, if they got any sense, they've invested so much in the hardware, they've learned how much it works, that they believe in this thing that has a future, right? If that is the case, you have to let the nodes ultimately be the arbiters of what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate to put in the chain. They have to be the ultimate source of authority. And if you do that, then you're running a network that understands what makes you unique opposed to other things. So when Marapool come up with this recent thing, which is further disrespect to the nodes. They're saying, don't worry about the nodes. They're not going to relay this crap around the network because it's of no interest to them. We're just going to solicit it anyway and stick it in blocks. And then the nodes have to store all that data that they didn't want forever. That, to me, shouldn't have been anything but people going bad actors. If you're doing that, you're undermining what makes Bitcoin unique. That's pretty obvious.
All they've done, I'm not here to defend them in any way, but all they've done is make what was already possible easier, right?
Yeah, but just because something's possible doesn't mean it's desirable.
Yeah.
So there's a reason it's not possible. I think that's the simplest retort to that. It's just that ask yourself why these things have to be solicited out of band. Why can't they just go through the P2P layer? Mm-hmm. Is there a good reason for that? It's not just an efficiency thing. It's because we don't want this stuff in the chain. And if you're going to put it in there, you're biting the hand that feeds you. And it's a whole. Have you read the fork size war or the block size war and all that?
The BitMEX.
Yeah, BitMEX research. Jonathan
Beer.
Yeah, great book, great history. It basically just comes down to a divide in the Bitcoin community that was one group that says nodes are what makes this thing special, and it doesn't matter what exchanges do or what miners do or what Bitmain does or any of that. You guys are employees of the network. Employees do what the boss says, and the boss is nodes. And it looked like David versus Goliath, but David won. David's the nodes, because that was it. So we're in the same situation again now, where people are saying, "Oh, don't worry. Like, there's millions of dollars worth of inscription spam. Great. There's a massive mining pool that can get several blocks worth of They've got that much hash power. They can get like 10 blocks in the blockchain every day. We're going to just put this stuff in there." And I'm saying, well, where is the consideration of the ramifications of that? Because we fought a literal war and won a literal war over the importance of the nodes and the fact that they are the final arbiter of what is and isn't acceptable in this whole ecosystem. And there's been no discussion of it. That's what really surprised me about it, because people say, oh, miners are going to include this stuff anyway because they can make money doing it. I'm like, and if you want to work against that, where's the incentive for the miners? And again, I'm saying, why will people run nodes?
I think it's more than the war itself. I think it's more than the block size war. I think it's the entirety of the history of Bitcoin needs bringing into that argument, because it is all the precursors to Bitcoin, the hard work people did trying to find a way to create a permissionless decentralized money to solve the double spend problem. It was Satoshi doing the hard work, constructing the jigsaw puzzle and creating Bitcoin. It's all the people who early on contributed it when people thought this is stupid or dumb or Bitcoin had no value. It's all the people who've built businesses on it. It's all the people who've worked hard trying to... Now, I even think of people like Anita Posh, all the work she's doing, traveling around Africa, trying to teach people about good money. It is the block size wars. Everything we went through there. It's the entirety of the history of Bitcoin. And now we're in here 15 years in, even longer now. And we have people who've been around for a long time in Bitcoin who I think are enjoying attacking Bitcoin. I think they're enjoying causing a shitstorm. And
well, it's good marketing, right?
Of course. And we can get into that. But if you're on a mission, if the mission is good money, then this stuff is, one, it's annoying. Two, it's potentially damaging, or arguably is damaging right now to certain people who maybe didn't understand about fees and UTXOs and are suddenly learning a harsh lesson. I think there is both a technical argument and I think there's a moral argument about this, but I think it's the entirety of it. It's all this hard work's been done, fighting regulators, attacks from governments. All this has happened, and now we're arguing about whether people can put quantum cats on a chain, and it's just, to me, it's just like, I don't know. It's both demoralizing, but also inspires to actually fight back.
I mean, I will fight this all day. I keep trying to be laissez-faire about it, but I can't. I'm compelled to push back against it. And it's funny that Ocean became the forefront of this whole thing, because, I mean, that is bitterly ironic, because the whole point of Ocean is that miners should be the ones themselves constructing block templates, and we don't want to have anything to do with it for the deeper purpose of decentralizing that horribly centralized part of Bitcoin, which is right now you have a dozen entities in the world that say what can and cannot get in the blockchain. It doesn't matter how much you distribute the hash rate around the planet. There's tens of thousands of people mining Bitcoin, however many, but they're all mining the same 12 or so pools. And to be honest, most of them are really just Bitmain with different storefronts. And that being the case, you just have a couple of people saying that goes in the chain, that doesn't. That's not censorship resistant. And we're talking real censorship at this point. So all of that, Ocean coming around and say, we need miners to be making templates themselves. So the pool just splits rewards. That's all it does. So you solve for cash flow. You're not solo mining anymore, but you're not outsourcing that incredibly important part of what happens. Every new block that gets found, you don't want it to be Foundry found this block, Foundry found that block, Antpool found this one, Foundry found this one, Antpool found that one, via BTC found this one. That's 3 names I've just said, right? And that looks like your average hour in Bitcoin. That's 3 entities saying this is okay in the chain, that's not. And also, all of the new coins generated in that process only went to the same 3 people. So you have this bottleneck on the way in and bottleneck on the way out. It's super centralized.
Right.
So the Ocean was about decentralizing that. And in the process, funnily enough, as a sort of bootstrapping mechanism, we still have to make the templates while we work on making it possible for miners to make their own templates. And we chose a template that kicked off a shitstorm about all of the spam, because we had a template that ran Bitcoin knots instead of Bitcoin Core, and that has more aggressive spam filtration. Caught a lot of this stuff, not all of it, because you can't catch all spam. You never can. And that's one of the most annoying arguments I come up against, the Nirvana fallacy, right? You can't catch all spam, so don't even try. There's such a frustrating argument, because
it's like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of good, or
well, it's never realistic to take that attitude in any communications protocol. Like, your email would be unusable if you didn't have spam filtration. That's just a fact.
But it doesn't catch everything.
It doesn't. You will always have one email. How many times a week do you have to tell someone, check your spam folder? Like, I've got the word Bitcoin in my email address. So like 50% of the time it ends up in people's spam filter. That's just reality. Like, how many times does spam end up in the inbox, and how many times does real emails end up in spam? It's just a way of life, man. Like, I cannot troll through thousands and thousands of spam emails every day. I can't do it. No one can. So, but also, I'm never going to sit there and tell my email guy, you can never truly defeat spam, so don't even try. Because that would just be impractical, right?
Just out of interest, I just pulled it up, and 8 of the last 10 blocks were those 3 names you said.
Right. I mean, they're the biggest 3 pools. After that, you got F2 pool, and then you have a bunch of smaller pools, which are all just fronts for Bitmain, as far as I can tell.
I've got some really important questions to get into that, but I've got a bigger question before that, and it's quite a tough one. Well, I think it's a tough question, but in a decentralized protocol, or with a decentralized protocol, how do we get to decide what it's meant to be for? So just
precedent.
Set up the framing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but add into that and then enforce it. Because I'm with you, but there are plenty of people who disagree and say, no, it's a protocol. Mm-hmm. I can do these things. They're valid transactions, so I'm going to do them. How do we define what it is? How do we enforce that? Is it another? Are we essentially in another war, whether we like it or not?
I think it's a lot softer, right? Because like the fork wars all came down to consensus stuff. Like if you wanted to go against what I think is fits with precedent and the general approach of Bitcoin in the past. Like, I'll say one thing, and hopefully I've got I'm not too ADHD to come back to what you're just saying. When we come with SegWit, right, there was this concept of, we need fewer UTXOs, because the more UTXOs you have, like, I know this has been like a meme of yours, not knowing what a UTXO is, right?
No,
like,
XPub.
Oh, sorry. Right,
I know what a
XPub.
UTXO. To be honest, I know what XPub is.
All right. So, I mean, the concept is, right, like you can have an $100 bill or you can have 5 $20 bills. And if you consolidated everything into $100 bills, you'd have a lot less to deal with, right? And it's going to cost you 5 times as much to spend 5 $20 bills than it would spending one $100 bill, because it's just 5 times more entries into the ledger, right? So when we come up with SegWit, there was this idea of, we want people to merge UTXOs. We don't want them to split them and make more of them, because the more UTXOs there are, the more burden you place on nodes. If there's 50 million UTXOs because everyone's got tiny splits, that's annoying, right? So the witness discount was brought about, that incentivizes people and makes it cheaper for them to spend a bunch of UTXOs to consolidate down to one. And it makes it more expensive to spend one UTXO and split it into a bunch of them. That's the concept, right? Makes sense?
It does, but is that something that happens in the background, or I'm meant to, like, myself, select my UTXOs?
Well, you should. Like, coin control is a part of life in Bitcoin. It's not visible, but like, look, if you got to buy, something that costs 19 quid and you've got a £20 note and you've got a £100 note, you spend the £20 note because you don't want to deal with £81 of change.
Sure,
right?
but I think coin control is a niche tool that I would be surprised if even
but that's lamentable.
0.1% of people did it. You really want the wallets designed in a way so they just do that for you, or at least give you choices.
Sure. I mean, it can do it for you in one sense, which is, we're getting way off topic, but this is good to talk about. It can do it for you in one sense, which is find an appropriately sized UTXO, right? Yeah. But I mean, there's no heuristic that's consistent, right? Maybe you want to spend the $100 bill rather than $20 bill for the $19 good, because you need 4 20s right now, rather than, so you want, and you request from the guy, hey, can I have 4 20s in my change? And you don't want maybe you want that. No wallet can guess for you what you actually want as your breakdown.
I'm going to guarantee you, outside of your circles,
no one deals with this.
No one deals with this. And to the point where, like,
but it's expensive. That's the problem. Like, if you're going to spend 5 $20 bills instead of one $100 bill, that is 5 times more inputs in your transaction. That is more data that's got to be written to the chain. And you're not, like, spending $1 billion in one UTXO is cheaper than spending $2 in 2 $1 UTXOs. It will literally cost you twice as much.
But to do that, you have to go through a level of education to understand that.
Sure.
And I think the experience that most people have will be similar to mine. I'm always confessing things on the show, things I've never done. I have never sent a transaction where I've selected a UTXO. It's always been my wallet that's done it for me. And it's just the way it is, because
fair enough.
Because when I spend money on my debit card, I just select the amount, or they select the amount and I scan it, or when I transfer money in the bank account.
Yeah.
So for Bitcoin, I just want the same. Here's an address, here's an amount, and it does it for me. I wouldn't know which wallet I have to use. Maybe there's specific wallets. I don't even know if my Ledger wallet does it. But
it does.
It does. But I'm always happy to make these confessions, because I think...
No, fair enough.
I think people should...
We want to know what default user behavior is, man. And it's important.
I think
can I shout out Spectre wallet?
Yeah, of course. Shout out any wallet.
This is my favorite thing about Spectre from the beginning. Well, and I'm not affiliated. I'm just a big fan of the project. It enforces good labeling. So you always know what's going on. So if I pay, if I've got one group of coins over here and one group of coins over there, and I'm about to give you some money, I want you to know about these ones and I don't want you to know about those ones. Like, so it's not just efficiency. Like, you don't want to spend 10 UTXOs when you can spend 1. It's privacy too. Like, I don't want to spend a UTXO that represents, like, I won the lottery and, stuck $5 million into Bitcoin, withdrew it all in one UTXO. I don't want to use that one when I pay some guy I don't really trust and I don't really want to know my whole balance. and I've got 2 UTXOs in my wallet. There's the $5 million one and there's the $100 one. I'm going to use the $100 one to pay you because then you only know I had $100 worth of Bitcoin. You don't know about the $5 million UTXO. There's that, right? Like it's a responsibility to your own security.
Sure, but the level of understanding required of Bitcoin and how it works, how UTXOs
it depends
work,
on how
work.
wallets are designed. Wallets can make it easy. Look, Wasabi, I'll shout out as well. They are really good at labeling everything. They'll say, who is this associated with? So you've just sent money to, I don't know, Coin Square, or what's the new UK one called? I can't remember what it's called. There's a
Coin Corner?
Coin Corner, yeah. Like you've just spent money there, it will make you label it. Who's this associated with? So this doesn't
they do that's really good as well is they tell you, like, when you send a transaction, they give you a level of privacy for each UTXO, and they will flag it and say this isn't like fully private when you send a transaction.
Right.
And this stuff will all be solved, I think, and abstracted away or presented by better UX in wallets.
There's only so much you can do. Some of it you just got to be responsible for. Like if you know, I remember as a kid, I was a musician, right? I was going around, like, you know, I would always get food at the end, but I was only like 16, right? And I would be in kebab shops in London, like trying to eat after a show. And I'd get paid like money that you wouldn't expect a kid to have. So there'd be like £200-300 in my pocket with £50 banknotes, right? Which you don't see that often in the UK. So I remember I had my kebab monies in my left pocket, £20. I got my gig money in the right pocket, $200, 200 quid. And I one time I accidentally gave the guy what was in my right pocket, and I remember just the guy being like, "Whoa, look how much money this kid's got!" And I'm like, "Shit, like
Shut
this,
the fuck up, man."
Real story, right?" And I'm in Camberwell, right, which is like definitely going to get stabbed. Like it's not, it's 3 a.m. on a Friday night. I'm a kid, like I've got like musical equipment like on me. I don't want to get. So you're conscious of these things, and there's no heuristic. There's no one that's going to come in and solve that problem for you.
Sure, but like I hammer the table about this over and over again, and I think everyone should read "Don't Make Me Think" by Steve Krug, because there's what you want to happen, but the reality of what people do. It's a bit like when we used to build websites. We used to use this website called usertesting.com. You get 10 people, it videos them, you say, do this action, and you would see what people would do, and you would learn so much from that. So you would end up having to design your UX based around natural human behavior, the instincts of what people do. And look, we should hammer the table. We should encourage people to do this and teach them this. But I still think it's very much niche. And that's just the reality.
I agree with you, man.
Yeah.
I think humans can do a lot of unnatural things.
Against their best interests.
No, I just mean like what's natural in Bitcoin behavior is not necessarily going to be helpful to you, but you can get burnt. Like what's natural is to leave your coins in Mt. Gox and then they get robbed and then you don't do it again, no matter how annoying it is. Like I see people like learning concepts about public key cryptography and stuff. I don't have any computer science background at all. I just had to learn all this stuff. Otherwise I'd have lost all my money at this point. Like, and I wouldn't have been able to, advocate for the things I believe in this movement are good. Like I have to learn what I need to learn to do it. And I think people do it. People do weird stuff and, that's unnatural and not instinctive. Like we're not monkey brains forever, right? Like I know what you mean, but I'm not willing to concede defeat on the battle. Like I will teach people how to run a node and open a lightning channel and do all this stuff. I will, but I know a lot of people aren't going to do it, but at least more will than if I hadn't done it, right? So,
of course. So, no, look, that's not to say people shouldn't do it. I'm just like expressing the what I think is the reality. But okay, so back to the point. It's like, what is Bitcoin? With a decentralized protocol defining what it is, I take it your history, but then this enforcement of that, because we have inscriptions, we have BRC20 tokens, we have shitcoins coming to Bitcoin, like we have all this happening. You consider it spam. Actually, before we get into that, sorry, we're jumping around out here. How do you define spam?
You can't.
Your question.
You can't. That's the point. It's just heuristics based, right? Okay. Like if I see the words Nigerian prince, $30 million, like it's spam, right? There's going to be a prince in Nigeria that really had $30 million and he ended up in everyone's spam folder. Like you can't objectively define spam.
Okay, how do you guys as Ocean identify spam?
In my case, or what I think is reasonable here, is to just look at stuff that's clearly working around all of the things Bitcoin is trying to prevent, right? So when it comes to the envelope that inscriptions use specifically, you have the if conditions when you're writing programming, right? And they've put a bunch of script that's designed to never execute inside an if condition after an op false, which is basically you're basically sending a script that is, you're telling all the Bitcoin nodes, this can never be executed, but here's the script anyway. And it contains a bunch of, JPEG data or whatever. That's clearly being done to get around a restriction. It's flouting something. It's like when someone writes, Peter McCormack, but they write a 3 instead of an E. It's like they're trying to get around a spam filter, right? Like we can infer it from what they're doing. So to me, it's like, it's not super hard to define it. It's not super hard to see it and come to some sort of 99% of us can agree this stuff isn't doing what it's supposed to do. Because no one would ever rationally put a bunch of extra garbage data, script that can never be executed inside a Bitcoin transaction. No one would do that because it would just cost them more money if they were using Bitcoins for its intended purpose. The fact that it's there betrays the fact that they are just taking advantage of a bug. So you can close the doors on that bug. They can find something else, sure. But the point is, go ahead, do it.
You've got a question on that.
What have we got?
No, you smiling?
Bug.
Well,
define bug.
No, not define bug. It's whether this was a bug.
Yeah, to me, you have a history of us treating arbitrary data in its own way, giving it a sandbox in the shape of op return, and placing a default limit on that hasn't been possible to exceed in any practical sense. So you could have a giant op return if you want. It's just impractical. You need to liaise with a mining pool to do it. No one did it. They found something that the nodes would actually accept and treat as genuine for reasons that go against the node's intentions when they do that, right? So nodes never had any sort of conception that someone would do that with this fake if condition. Nodes would never be like, that's fine. This is clearly within the intended purpose of Taproot and all that. It's clever, but it's an exploit. It's just injection of arbitrary data,
but
right?
If nodes didn't want that, couldn't they just run knots and then they wouldn't have that? That would exclude that, right?
Yeah, Knots has patched it. So there's the data carrier size variable that just says, here's how much arbitrary data my node is willing to take. And that doesn't include what's included by these inscriptions because that's a bug. So we updated data carrier size to say it needs to include that. It's not that you can't do any of it or you can't use it at all, but it should conform to how much we allow in other contexts. Like it's still arbitrary data. We allow 42 bytes of arbitrary data, regardless of how you do it. It's just like you've got 2 doors on the way into your building and you say, all right, nothing bigger than 6 foot can come in through one door. And then you've got elephants walking through the other door. And you've got this, you're changing the size of the first door and you're just ignoring the fact that there's another door that everyone's coming in. It's like, okay, we'll just update this number we write for how big the things are that can come in to include the other door because everyone's not paying any attention to the size limit we placed on the first door. And it's making a mockery of it. Like this is my contention with these people that are saying, it's censorship or it's useless, it's fruitless, all this stuff. I'm like, why do we have data carrier size? Why does that exist? It's to limit the amount of arbitrary data you can put in, full stop, not through one particular method, which is op return, and ignore all other methods of doing it. So this other method was discovered, and now we're playing catch up rather than preempting it, which is admittedly why you can make more of a credible claim of us playing a game of whack-a-mole. But my contention for a long time has been, if before they found this exploit, we closed it, no one would have ever batted an eyelid. But because we found it, they started exploiting it and we want to patch it after the fact. That's what mainly causes the outrage and the misunderstanding.
And is there talk to patch it?
There's pull requests, there's arguments, there's somewhat contrived contentiousness around the whole thing. I don't really buy it. I think back to like the more...
Who gets to make that decision if that patch goes live?
Well, I mean, it depends how centralized and how reflective of the community consensus Bitcoin Core is. I think increasingly people are quite disillusioned with Bitcoin Core. I really don't want to be gratuitous here because I appreciate Bitcoin Core. I appreciate the people that work on it. I'm pretty unhappy with how things have been lately, but I don't want to, I'm not,
Don't want to start that fight.
Well, it's not that. No, I just don't want to rock the boat because it's still very good and still very functional. It's just quite centralized. Like, it's an increasingly small club. We've had a lot of people sort of slowly disappear from it. And I don't agree with some of the decisions that have been made. I think, like, Vladimir was great. Vladimir isn't really around now. And Vladimir was sort of a more mature leader in the space who would say, no, we don't like arbitrary data here. And he would just sort of, he wasn't down there in the engine room coding everything. He was just more of a
leader.
Yeah, he was just more of a, like, the boss comes along and they zoom out. They go more broad stroke. They're not down there tweaking every single little thing.
But in the end, who does get to make is it the maintainers? Between the 5 of them, there's usually? Is it down to those 5 people to say?
Yes, but with the caveat that what they do is expected to somewhat mirror community consensus. If those 5 people start doing things that generally Bitcoiners obviously don't like, then Bitcoin Core is over. It's not like they can force every node user to start running, malicious code that none of the node users want. But it's not black and white, right?
Yeah,
if Core do something that maybe wasn't that popular, 99% of the nodes are going to be running it anyway. But if they do something like, egregiously awful that everyone hates, that's totally against us, and we're consensus against it, then Core just dies instead. So they're kept in check by the sort of reality of how it all works.
And general consensus right now, is it split?
I think most people just aren't really aware of what's going on. I think a lot of people have a sort of ambivalence towards the spam. There's one contention that's been made by sort of people I really respect, like Lynn Alden, that are saying, look, it's going to be priced out eventually. To me, that's cope. To me, that's not realistic, and it's not what's happening. Like, there's more spam than there's ever been, and it's worse than it's ever been. So I don't know why we assume that spam will be priced out by genuine economic activity. I don't know why anyone makes that assumption, because it's not what's happening. And they also have they abuse the witness discount to the point where they can do things much more cheaply, and they do irrational things that you just can't compete with. Like, I'm never going to pay, thousands of sats to move one sat, because it doesn't make any sense as a Bitcoiner. Whereas if I subscribe to ordinal theory and that one sat is worth thousands of dollars, then I will do that. But I'm now operating, there's no competition there. No one is going to, if you're going to spend $5 moving one sat, someone that's going, no one's going to compete with that in the sort of default use case of Bitcoin, because it doesn't make sense. People are just going to end up using it custodially again, which is like the fear of big blockers in the past. That's why they wanted big blocks. But I mean, that's another whole rabbit hole. Like, I don't.
Yeah. So with Ocean, what have you decided to filter out?
So we have a smaller data carrier size limit, which is what it used to be in Bitcoin Core, and it's now about double that in Bitcoin Core by default. So I think BRC20, it uses 45 bytes of op return, and we allow 42 or 43. I forget which it is. So none of that stuff makes it into the default template. I should say Ocean offers 3 templates, right? We offer a normal template that is just Bitcoin Core. We've got one that specifically doesn't let ordinals in, and we've got one that is just knots, but without the 300 kilobyte blocks. So the knots one is the most aggressive. We get rid of most of the inscription stuff. We get rid of the stamp spam, which, that stuff I was talking about earlier that was like deliberately malicious. I think there's a protocol called Runes that we don't get rid of because it only uses a tiny bit of op return. I think we'd like to, but we just haven't got around to it yet. And ultimately, though, importantly, we've left it up to our miners to choose which template they want. And, so when blocks get found by Ocean that don't or do contain spam, and people come at us about it, we're saying, speak to the miner, here's his Bitcoin address. If you don't like the template they chose, go and mine yourself. That's beautiful to me, because that is what Bitcoin is at heart. Like, if you don't like the blocks, you have to mine a different block yourself. You can't fake the proof of work, right?
And when it launched, was it just the most aggressive filter originally?
Yeah, it was just knots.
And so
originally.
is that when all the samurai stuff happened?
No, because it was an older version of knots. So the first 2 blocks we found just looked like default core blocks because it was an older version of knots.
So when did the samurai stuff happen? Because I know it wasn't including Whirlpool transaction. Is that right?
No. So there's a few things. The first 2 blocks were just normal core, so it contained all the samurai stuff. After that, like I was talking about specifically with the amount of op return data, it's not Samurai's Whirlpool that's excluded. It's the pre-commits, which are they're 46 bytes, I think, which is more than our thing. If we allow that, we have to allow the thing at 45 bytes, which is inscriptions or BRC20. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I think all we wanted to do was just whitelist it because we have no intention of stopping Samurai from doing what they're doing. We spoke to them about it, and they told us what's in those 46 bytes, and I found this kind of funny. I hate picking fights with samurai because it's just
they're the last people I want to fight.
It's just fucking annoying. But look, I mean, they sent out this thing saying, look, we use this much op return. It's very chest beating. Like, we're not changing the way we do it. Ocean's got to change, and we're like, well, what do you use it for? And it's a placeholder. Like, they're going to use it for something in the future, but they're not using it for anything at the moment. So it's literally, it's just a waste of space. And they said rather hilariously to me, well, to the world, they said, we reserve the right to use that much. And this is just so funny to me because you're reserving the right to store data on other people's computers. Like, that's not how any of this works. Like, you need their permission. This is not that kind of system. But regardless, I'd still rather whitelist it. And I think we will when we just get through our mountain of priorities. Like, I have no interest in not putting that stuff in. The way it was initially presented was really annoying because they said we enacted a policy to target their coin joins.
Just not true.
Well, that line of code that says op return is 42 bytes is from 2014 and it hasn't changed. Okay. That was from 4 years before Samurai even existed. So the characterization of it, of us targeting them, was just pure bullshit. It was just pure, like, spark outrage, get 10 million likes on Twitter. It's just annoying. Like, I don't need, and also, like, it was fairly polite, the private exchanges between us, but guns blazing on Twitter, it's just, the drama is unhelpful. Like, Luke's immediate approach was like, oh, like, I don't want to stop Samurai from getting in our blocks. Let's see if we can whitelist it. Like, we don't need all the drama. And two of our 3 templates allow it in anyway. So it's like, granted, the one that doesn't is the one most people use, but decentralized templates will be here soon anyway. And then it's up to the miner for real at that point. So if Samurai stuff isn't getting in, talk to the miner. Ocean allows miners to do what they want. We don't want to be in this position anyway. It's deeply ironic that we are. And when people asked us, what are you going to do when people make templates that contain stuff you consider spam? Are you going to reject those blocks? And our unequivocal answer was no, that would defeat the whole point. It really is up to the miners. It's more important to have decentralized template construction than it is to defeat spam. It is a deeper principle. But I am here primarily to talk about spam, no, not.
And so with your templates, you're getting rid of most of the spam, but not all of it.
Yeah.
But in doing that, sometimes there are casualties which are non-spam transactions, but are still too large to get through.
Well, if they contain a bunch of op return, they'll definitely not get into into the default template. So Samurai's pre-commits are a perfect example of that. It's 46 bytes of stuff. We only allow 42. I mean, at the end of the day, that is not transaction data. That is random data from the perspective of a node. No particular interest in storing this on my hard drive. This is you and your private system that labels things for remixing and all that stuff. Because if you mix on Samurai and you do a further round of mixing, it's free after that. And I think that's what that all pertains to. It's labeling transactions, saying this guy's already mixed, so this next one is on the house. That's what all that is. But again, as a node, I don't care about storing a scheme of how you do this stuff. It's not in my... I need to know about the transaction you sent him, because when you send me some of those, I need to know that happened, right? I don't need to know. It's none of my business whether that pre-commit now gets a free further, round of Whirlpool mixing. It's not my job to know that, and placing that burden on me. You could just maintain it in a private database. It doesn't need to be on the blockchain. It's not like anyone can verify it. That's kind of my ideological problem with all of this stuff, right? Is I mean, that comes back to the questions you asked me right at the beginning. I think fundamentally people just don't understand the Oracle problem. And, Gigi, we're all fans of Gigi, right?
Well, he doesn't like me, but anyway.
He doesn't like you?
It doesn't matter. It does have to be a two-way relationship.
Well, you might appreciate the guy.
I love his
regardless.
work. I think he's brilliant.
Yeah, I think we all do. But the whole bananas on the blockchain meme, right? So the point is, like, Bitcoin can enforce ownership that is, reflected in a signature generated by a private key that corresponds to a Bitcoin address, right? If you don't have the private key because you're Craig Wright, no one is going to believe anything else you do. It doesn't matter if you say, I own those coins. You don't because you didn't have the private key. Bitcoin will enforce that. Whereas if you upload data into the chain that says 2 + 2 = 5 or whatever, that's not true. And it doesn't become true because it's in the blockchain. So if the data in the blockchain says, hey, you own this monkey JPEG or this banana is from the Dominican Republic or whatever, doesn't become true because it's only as good as the reliability of the person that put it in. There's no cryptography in any of this. It's all just assertions made by humans. That's what all this bullshit is. And it's why it's so annoying. They have to latch on to the permanence of what Bitcoin's, it persists forever. You've got data that will persist forever, but pretending that the interpretation of that data will persist forever when it's really just your ordinals wallet works like this and it says that sat is the rare sat, not that one. Bitcoin is not enforcing any of these understandings. So the minute you go, the understanding's gone and the rare sat is back to just being a generic. I mean, there is no sat. That's what makes it. It's literally like you're making tables at IKEA, 10 of them a day, and someone goes, "Oh wow, that inch on this table is a rare inch," and you're like, "What? That's nonsense. That doesn't mean anything. It's like a kilometer. It doesn't exist. You can measure something as being 1 kilometer long, but the kilometer is an abstract. There are no sats. You just have UTXOs. Some of them are thousands of sats large. Some of them are 10,000 sats large. But there is no individual sat making them up. It's just an arbitrary measure, right? You don't have individual meters within a kilometer. It's just like there are 1,000 meters in a kilometer. It's not that meter 3 is different from meter 2. It doesn't.
So it's a lie.
It's nonsense. And it's also, this is a deeper attack specific to ordinals, is that Bitcoin is fungible and it needs to be understood as fungible. One £10 note is the same as any other £10 note. It can't be that you're responsible for the origin of that £10 note if it was stolen from a bank or anything like that. That's not your responsibility. It's just £10. It represents an abstract notion. It's not specific to the cash, the actual physical cash. And this was enshrined into the principles of fiat, right? Like the dollar bill represents the dollar. There's no interest you don't need to know the origin of each piece of fiat because they all need to be equal. And you can attack it by...
That's not exactly true because some fiat notes have numbers on them and some people want those numbers.
That's true. They do, but
it's nonsense itself.
Well, conceptually we treat it as fungible.
Yeah.
Like if you have one scrumpled up £20 note with scribbles all over it, you don't care. It's still worth 20. And if you have like one freshly minted £20 note that's clean and all that lot, they're equivalent in your head. Like you can have like special quarters, like, a relative died and that was the £20 in their wallet that day and it means something to you. But that's still beside the point. The point is, It's not individual units of money aren't supposed to be different from other individual units of money. That's the notion of fungibility. You can't really have money without that.
Let me ask you something on that. So the ordinals protocol, which numbers the sats. Mm-hmm. So there is a UTXO with 100 million sats in. It chooses to number those 1 to 100 million. Mm-hmm. But it's not actually numbering the sats. It's saying there's 1 to 100 million exists within that, okay? If they wanted to extract the first sat, if they create a UTXO, a new UTXO, which is one sat, is that essentially the first sat from that? Or is it the last one?
I hesitate to credit this with like, the more you speak about it, the more real it becomes. It's
it is just a shared hallucination, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But this is the thing. They say, well, Bitcoin's a shared hallucination too. And I'm like, yes, but it's backed by proof of work. You can't change the hallucination without, recreating all of the energy and all that stuff and all the nodes.
It's quite important. So say you have a UTXO with just say it's got, for ease, it's got
Yeah.
1,000 sats in it. And they split that into 2 UTXOs, which is 500 sats each. How do you know which one's 1 to 499 and which one's 500 to 1,000? Is their protocol just deciding that?
I think so, but I don't know how they do it.
But there's not one way of going, oh, well, that UTXO must be 1 to 499 and that one must be 500 to 1,000.
You can assert that it must be, but you must do that in accordance with ordinal theory, which is just a tiny...
made-up theory.
Well, yeah, I mean, all theories are made up, but the point is this one can be arbitrarily changed. Like, there's been hiccups in it before where they said, all right, all the wallets are wrong now. It's really going to work like this. Like,
Yeah,
the
they
fact
had a
that
numbering
can be...
bug at some point, I think, didn't they?
but
They had one job.
the point is, like, if I make a 22nd millionth Bitcoin, like, there's a whole system of, like, I have to fight against a torrent of ocean tide, like, pushing me in the opposite direction. If I'm ordinals guy and I want to change the way that works, there's no boundary to overcome like that. Like, it's back in fiat land. It's back in centralized assertions made by corruptible humans, and it's not a serious thing.
What makes ordinals protocol decentralized?
I don't know very much about it.
Assertions that it's decentralized. It's not. It's like
Okay, look back to the pool.
yeah. Another cup of coffee.
Another cup of coffee. Actually, that's too many coffees. I'm not going to do that. So with Ocean, one of the memes, criticisms, accusations when you launched was you're throwing money away. You're leaving money on the table. Because,
Right, yeah.
Bear with me. So you could be including these, but you're leaving money on the table. And I'm pretty sure you're coming from a position of ethics of what we're trying to do here, and that's great. Does that mean everybody who's mining with your pool and using those templates shares your same ethics? Is that basically it? Because there's no other. If you don't share those ethics, you might as well mine with another pool where you would make more money.
Great question. In theory, it does, and that's what a lot of people assumed. But in reality, not at all.
Okay.
Because the context of how mining is normally done is a mystery to most people. And we got attacked by a lot of people that I genuinely wish I'd been more hostile to people making assertions about us paying out less as a result of what we do. Intuitively, if there's a spam transaction that pays $1 million in transaction fees and we don't include it and another pool does, how can we possibly compete? Like, I get that. That's an intuitively obvious question you have. Reality requires understanding how payout mechanisms on other pools actually work, which is ridiculous, but no one really is aware of it. Like, there's not the real pain point here is that miners haven't been solving for profit for a long time. Like, most people are saying miners only care about profit, therefore no one's going to mine with Ocean because of this intuitive understanding about making less because of spam. But miners haven't been caring about profit forever. They care about cash flow. That's why they mine in pools. They need to have regular, reliable income so that they can pay their energy bills. You can't wait around for months to blocks to be found. So
That's the reason to mine in a pool.
yeah,
But what's the reason to mine with Ocean if you're not including these transactions? And so, the expectation is you would receive less money.
Well, because the assumption is that other pools work the same way Ocean does, but includes the spam. They don't. All of them now pay out FPPS instead of what Ocean does, which is called tides.
Okay, explain the difference.
So FPPS is basically hash rate rental. The pool constructs the blocks and essentially leases all of the miners and their hash rate and says, solve this block for me. You don't know what it is. You don't know what's in there. Send me X amount of hash rate and I will pay you X amount of sats per work you do. And it doesn't matter if we find any blocks or if we find more blocks than we expect. We're just going to pay you the going rate for your hash rate. And actually, a lot of miners like this, particularly Canadian ones, that have to pay more tax if they are a Bitcoin miner than if they are hash rate rental. So this is a regulatory nightmare because the miners in Canada actively don't want to be Bitcoin miners. They want to characterize themselves as rented hash rate, and they don't want anything to do with Bitcoin or mining. So
hold on a second. So the pools are renting based on, they know their expectation, the amount of blocks they will mine.
Yeah.
And they pay out based on that. And does that mean those people pointing the hash rate out don't actually really know what they're being paid? They think they're getting a percentage of what's being mined, but they're not.
They tend to think that. They're absolutely not. They're getting paid what is being established as a fair market rate for their hash rate.
And so sorry, I keep interrupting.
That's all right.
And if therefore a pool outperforms that, is actually mines more blocks than it thinks, they're just keeping the difference. And if they pay less, they suffer the cost.
Yes, exactly. In theory.
Never knew that.
Right. It's called FPPS, right? And what the pool does is it pays out an average. I don't know what window they use. I know that the published formula Luxor have shared is 144 blocks, which is 24 hours. They say, the network found this many blocks. There was this much subsidy. There was this much transaction fee revenue. Divide the whole thing. This is what the total hash rate of the network is. You're 1% of it. Therefore, you are owed this much money. And don't worry about us. We will go and find the blocks and make ourselves whole, but we are just going to pay you that much for your hash rate. Even if we don't find any blocks and there is no money to pay you, we will just pay you for your hash rate. And it should all balance out in theory, because if we find more blocks than we expect, we pocket the difference, just like you said.
But if they're doing that,
it's randomness insurance, because you don't.
Sure, but if they're doing it based on the average 140 blocks, I assume it's a rolling average.
Yeah.
Then that would include the expected fees from ordinals as well.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, it's way more rickety than that in practice, because weird stuff happens. So there were two weird anomalous transactions, right? There was one where F2Pool picked up a 19 Bitcoin transaction fee, and there was one where Antpool picked up an 83 Bitcoin transaction fee. Now, what happens is if you're paying out based on a network average and you're a pool that didn't find those two blocks, you now have to pay out way more per share because the value of a share is higher based on those anomalous blocks. But you as a pool didn't actually get that money. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So your miners are owed more than you're ever actually going to bring in. That doesn't work. And
they didn't adjust for those anomalies.
They have some sort of agreed, this is how much we can fudge the numbers. And the reality of it is they don't really adhere to the formula at all. And this is, I think I can say this publicly because Hafa from Swan, who's,
It's on the show this week.
Yeah, right. And I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but big fan of Hafa. He's a big fan of Ocean. Swan is somewhat mining with Ocean. And this was one of the main claims they made was in high transaction fee environments, that's where we start not getting the money we'd expect.
Okay.
Because FPPS kind of needs to set these like within a certain range, we will pay an average. But if empty blocks happen, right, that's just an artifact of how mining on a pool works. We can't include those in our calculation, and that's probably miners are happy about that. But also, if there's a bunch of high fees that suddenly go into one weird pool, we can't include those either. But generally, they have to keep moving goalposts and all that because they'll end up bankrupt very quickly if they don't. It's a very high risk business.
And so they move it in their favor, but if there's some slightly larger pool blocks because of ordinals or whatever crap's in there, then they're just going to pocket that.
I think the reason they wouldn't is because in theory there's competition, right? If you're mining with all the pools and Antpool keep paying you less than Foundry, but the transaction fee revenue's been pretty consistent, then why wouldn't you just switch to Foundry? I mean, in theory, competition keeps everyone honest, but there's all these KYC regulations and stuff. If you're Russian, can you mine with Foundry? They're they're super regulated American entity. I don't think so. But
then it does sound like you will just get what you should be getting then, kinda.
Well, I think it's not far off to give credit to them, but all Ocean does is it just takes what the block is and splits it amongst our miners. That's it. We don't take anything. It's much simpler, so we can be transparent with it, and we can, it's very easy for you to verify this is how much I mined. This is my hash rate. This is the pool's hash rate. The pool's hash rate is reflective of how many blocks the pool is finding. So I would expect my split of this block we just found to be exactly this percentage, and you can verify that to the SAT. So
that's what I thought everyone did. That's what my assumption was.
There's no way to verify what go. But look, at the end of the day, you can mine with Foundry for a day. They can have a bad day and not find any blocks, and you'll still be paid.
Sure.
They paid you money that doesn't exist. How are you going to verify that? It has nothing to do with the blockchain.
Have you done the comparison of what miners get if they mine with you versus the other pools, and is it less?
No, it's not. It's the preliminary data I have at the moment that I was given by Bob Burnett is around. It's higher than some pools and lower than others, and
It doesn't make sense to me that.
I'm hesitant to
Yeah.
draw a conclusion from it because we haven't been around long enough. The resolution's really bad. Ocean's hash rate is 0.1% of the network. We've only found 22 blocks. Trying to make any sort of assertion, I'm surprised it's even that close, to be honest. What we need hundreds of blocks over months and months and months, and then we can go, right. Then you adjust for all the transaction fee revenue. Maybe Ocean just got unlucky, right? If we find all our blocks at weekends, when the transaction fees are lower and like that was up, you have to adjust for all these things. It's really hard. If the other pools were transparent in their payouts, we could do apples for apples in 5 minutes. We can't. We can only mine with Foundry and Antpool and Via and F2Pool and then do months of comparison and say, here's like we can even compare Ocean, what blocks Ocean would have found and paid out versus what miners actually got mining on other pools. Like every time F2 pool finds a block, we can say this is what Ocean would have found at exactly that moment and do a comparison then. And we're doing that. But I wish I had the data to share with you now. I just don't.
I, based on what you've told me, I would be surprised if you are comparable. I would expect at least you to be slightly smaller, slightly smaller payouts. Because even with that rolling average, and if the pools are competing, then they have to try and share that out. You're just sharing less out in the blocks you mine.
Intuitively, I'd agree with you.
Yeah.
In practice, it hasn't worked that way.
Fine.
So generally the difference between, because we have core template and NOTS template, right?
Yep.
Ignoring the or disrespect to template.
Yeah.
So generally the difference is around 2 or 3 million sats. That's a sum total of 4 to 6 million sats a week because we find 2 blocks a week. 4 to 6 million sats a week is, what's a million sats right now? That's $700, $680 or something. So, you're talking like $2,000, $4,000 a week over the entire pool. So if you're a pleb miner, we're
marginal.
It's like we're talking like £1 a week if you're a pleb miner, something like that. Like it's really the difference. I mean, it's dwarfed by the fact that most pools charge you around 2.5%, 3% to mine, and we charge 0. That's way more significant.
Right. Do you think that's then closing the gap?
I think it's more than closing the gap.
Right.
Plus
okay.
all the other FPPS weirdness. Right.
So the people then pointing their hash rate at you, my expectation is then there are some making the economic argument, but I still think there's some are making the ethical argument still to do it. There must be.
Well, I definitely think it's hard to know because we work so differently that you have too many things to really make a definitive statement. I mean, I think everyone is ethically aligned that's on Ocean because practically no one is using the core template. We do charge 2% for the core template, so there is that disincentive. But no one is using the or disrespected template either, and that's 0%. And that's the one that allows Samurai but gets rid of inscriptions. So everyone's just using the Ocean default. And maybe I'll take that out of the equation because it's not apples for apples again. We can't really know until we have miners making their own templates. But the point is, like, if you had a pool that worked exactly the same way as Ocean did, with the same hash rate, with the same transparency and all these other things, the verifiable splits, we're going to have Lightning payouts any day now, and it's going to use Bolt 12, which it's incredible. It's going to be verifiable, and that's not trivial to do on Lightning because Lightning's really private. Bitcoin is public, right? I can verify anyone sending any UTXO anywhere. Lightning doesn't really work that way by default. So we had to come up with a whole methodology for making everything remain verifiable and trustless, even though we're paying out people on Lightning, which is super cool. And we have to use some of the bleeding edge features of Lightning. But I'm very excited to roll this out. But the point is, if there was another pool in parallel that did everything exactly the same way Ocean did, then you could do an apples for apples comparison. But even then, it depends on luck. And when you've only found 22 blocks, the point is we could have found 24 blocks by now instead of 22. And then miners would be like 10% more in the green, right? And so that's going to throw off any comparison you do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No,
like
it does.
the luck is 99% of any calculation you do right now. The luck is the main factor. It's nothing to do with marginal negligible fees from ordinals and all that stuff. I don't
Okay.
know. Maybe all this gets cut out because we've got some
No,
coffee
no,
and
we don't care. We always have the stuff
right.
in the background.
Just for your benefit, then, that's the main point. Like, there is a difference. If there was an identical pool to Ocean, including all the spam, that would, in theory, yes, it would earn a little bit more. But there are so many other more relevant factors. No FPPS, no ability for us to pocket a little bit in high fee environments, charging a 2% fee instead of 0%, and luck. Like, we really could have found 26, 27 blocks by now and been lucky. Instead, I think our pool average luck is like 90 or
You
80.
found the expected amount of blocks.
No, we're around 89, 90% luck, which is very surprising because our comparison data that we have, even though it's not definitive yet, put us around in the middle of all the FPPS pools, even though we're running at about 89, 90% luck.
What do you mean 89, 90% luck?
It just basically means how many blocks did you find versus what your hash rate would predict you have found.
So you're above.
Well, it looks that way,
Nice.
But again, we don't have
Okay,
the
yeah,
data.
enough data.
Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if we're not including spam and we're above, then FPPS is a completely rigged show as far as I'm concerned. FPPS doesn't work long term because it only works if you have predictable income from blocks as a miner, because if you have 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes, I've said this point a lot of times publicly, but I'll repeat it one time here because it's really important. Once upon a time, miner income was totally predictable from your hash rate because you knew what your hash rate was versus the network hash rate. You had a very good estimate. No one really knows what the network hash rate is. It's all estimated from how many blocks get found. But if you're 1% of the network hash rate and you're back in 2010, 2011, you know there's 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes and there's basically 0 transaction fees. You can figure out every 10 minutes, I get half a Bitcoin. I get 0.5 of a Bitcoin. It's exactly 1% of the 50 Bitcoins generated. But then it halves to 25, and there's a sprinkling of transaction fees, which are unpredictable. Then it halves to 12 and a half. And it gets less and less predictable because transaction fee revenue is not predictable, right? So FPPS, how are you supposed to verify what you're getting paid reflects what was in any of the blocks? Because the blocks are not predictable anymore. You might have a block where there's 7 Bitcoins worth of transaction fees as opposed to 0.1 Bitcoin worth of transaction fees. That's not predictable anymore. You're trying to predict the price of Blockspace. That's as unpredictable as the price of Bitcoin. That's not something you can predict as a miner. So you can't verify that the pool is given. How is the pool supposed to say, here is the price of your hash rate, which is reflective of how expensive Blockspace is over the next week? How are you supposed to make that assertion and take into account the fact that there'll be a new use? Like suddenly the price of Bitcoin will tank 20 grand and the blockchain's the mempools are full because everyone's transferring money to exchanges. Some of it's people sending money to themselves just to try and trick everyone to make the price go even lower. Like they do that, right? Like when the price tanks and people are going, stop hunting, there'll be massive transactions in the blockchain trying to scare everyone going, there's loads of money moving to exchanges and all that stuff. If that happens, suddenly Blockspace gets more expensive. Suddenly there's more transaction fee revenue. How was FPPS supposed to know that was going to happen? Like it knew that the next 50 blocks were all going to pay out exactly 50 Bitcoins exactly every 10 minutes on average. Do you know what I mean? Like transaction fee.
Because it can't go back and repay people.
Well, you can adjust based on a moving average, but you just can't make guarantees. And the whole system is about making guarantees. If you point a petahash at us, we will pay you this based on this calculation. Then you suddenly get a bunch of empty blocks, or the transaction fee revenue drops to 0, just because it's a weekend or whatever.
It's the transaction fees that change all this.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's
that makes
unpredictable.
sense.
Like Blockspace is unpredictable. That's a market. Whereas subsidy, as programmed by Satoshi, that was predictable. That's all I'm saying here. So as you transition from miners getting paid by subsidy to getting paid by transaction fee revenue, you transition away from models where pools can guarantee money to miners.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
And if everyone used your hardcore template and it was 0%, how does Ocean make money, or does that not matter?
I think it's a bootstrapping issue. We're still bootstrapping.
So you may raise that at some point.
Well, no, we will have fees eventually. We have to. Ultimately it's a for-profit business, but it's also not viable just to run this thing as a public service to Bitcoin. Like we have to run the servers. We've got to be diligent about how we make the whole thing work. I mean, it was called Eligius before, and that was a big pool. It was 20% of the network hash rate, and that was when Luke ran it as a hobby with a server sitting, Luke and WizKid run it. WizKid had a server in his bedroom, right? And they got 20% of the network hash rate. They found 16,000 blocks or something, like 300,000 Bitcoins were mined by that pool.
Amazing.
So that was Ocean V1. They eventually just sort of got bored and stopped doing it. And then this is Ocean V2, which is, oh crap, the network is completely centralizing. Like everyone is mining with Bitmain or Foundry, and that's like it. You've got F2 pool as well, but that's super centralized at this point. So we're like, we don't just need a new pool, we need a pool that's designed in such a way that if Ocean had the CIA's boot on its neck, we'll be able to say, look, we don't control what goes in the blocks. It's up to our miners what goes in the blocks. And at that point, then they have to go and chase all the miners in the world. And
Good luck with that.
Right, it's good,
Yeah.
eh? That's how you want it.
So if you found, was it 22 blocks?
I think so.
And you're 0.1% of the hash rate,
Yeah.
you're having little to no impact. Little impact on the amount of spam. In an ideal world, you'd get it to 100%.
What Ocean mining 100%
Everyone.
of the blocks?
It just
Right
not
now,
you. That
yeah.
100% of the blocks would only contain transactions which are financial transactions based on what
Yeah.
you and Giacomo and Jack Dorsey and people believe Bitcoin is and should be used for.
I won't speak for Dorsey. I don't even know his position on spam,
okay,
frankly.
that's fair. Okay, well,
I know Giacomo's position.
I know Giacomo's and I know Luke's.
Yeah.
What else needs to be done in your mind? How do we, if this is the best thing for Bitcoin and we agree, as a group of people agree that's right, bearing in mind we live in a world of, live with a decentralized protocol where people have different opinions of what it is, even though it's not a war, is a battle, whatever you want to call it, how do you get to that point where this shit goes away?
I think it's all about thresholds. I think these spam systems require a lot of marketing and it's very difficult to get momentum for self-sustaining arbitrary data schemes in Bitcoin. You need to raise a lot of money. I think it's only really possible past a certain threshold. So I think we always managed to squash it before without even doing anything as hardcore as changing default mempool policy. It literally was just forum posts saying, I don't want this stuff in Bitcoin. Bitcoin isn't for this. As I said, the devs of these protocols would just go, well, screw you then, and they'd go over to Ethereum because they don't want to waste their time developing and raising venture capital money and all that stuff on a network that's openly hostile to what they're doing. It's anyone with any sense is going to go, can we just do it on Ethereum because they want us here? And we don't really need the pretense of decentralization anyway, because anyone with half a brain knows it doesn't, it's all a LARP.
So hold on, do we now want Ethereum to work so we keep some of that shit away from us?
It's a good idiot container. It always was. But I mean, being kind, as I was earlier, it's for more experimental stuff. It's more decentralized than other things. It's more decentralized than an Amazon web server. Decentralized. I disagree with Paolo Ordino here. It's decentralization versus centralization. They're not binary things.
It's a spectrum.
Right. And back in the day, Satoshi basically said that goes in, that doesn't. It was basically centralized. But the white paper's I've come up with a way to make decentralized, permissionless, peer-to-peer cash and all that stuff. But the Bitcoin gets more and more decentralized as it continues to exist with
directionally.
Yeah. Right. So that's the trend, right? These other projects don't, but they also don't really need to either. But it's relatively decentralized, these other things, and it's for that kind of stuff. But I mean, I'm being kind. I don't think this stuff is well-intentioned, experimentation. I don't think what any of the spam is on Bitcoin is any of that. I think it's
it's a scam.
It's just fly-by-night scamming. And annoyingly, that's the worst part of it, because they can do this stuff more efficiently without any philosophical change in what they're promising and what they're delivering. They could use op return instead of, they could hash stuff, and fit it inside even the NOT's default size of that. Like I said, you can run a whole side chain and hash what goes on in it and include it in op returns, even with the aggressively small size that NOTS allows for op return. You can do so much with 42 bytes of data.
So why don't they?
Because it destroys the pretense of what they're doing. You need the permanence of Bitcoin's blockchain to store the actual JPEG, right? The interpretation of who owns the JPEG is a totally centralized system that can be changed arbitrarily, but let's ignore that. Let's pretend that, intellectual property, which is, totally unenforceable according to, Bitcoin's blockchain itself. Let's pretend that Bitcoin will manifest and come to life. And if someone uses your JPEG against your permission, Bitcoin will smack them down and, delete the JPEG off their hard drive that they right click and say, like, pretending you got all that. You need to pretend this stuff is the point. And you can only really do it if you say Bitcoin is decentralized and we will use it to store this stuff. Somehow magically these magical properties will persist. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, that illusion is part of making a believable scam, and it doesn't last long. But when we tell these people, can you please use a sidechain, please merge mine, you can do things, you can still anchor your data in Bitcoin without harming it. They're like, no, we want it.
They want it in there. They want the permanence.
Yeah, they want, but the point is the interpretation can never be permanent because Bitcoin will never enforce the intellectual property of the JPEG owner. It can't.
So if the ordinals protocol closed down for whatever reason, because I don't know where it is or how it exists, how it's decentralized, but just for whatever reason, say it did close down or had a catastrophic bug, all those things that have been inscribed and been put into the Bitcoin blockchain, they lose meaning at that point.
Yeah. I mean, yes. Like, I immediately want to find caveats
because
and stuff.
you need the ordinal system, but you need an ordinal wallet to be able to say that SAT is that quantum cap.
Yeah, you need the interpretation of a rare SAT to persist. You need other people to believe it's rare too, which is why it's so much more messed up than like a lucky nickel that you keep in your pocket or something. You don't need other people to believe it's a lucky quarter, right? Like, as long as you do, that's all that matters, right? Like, the idea that I need everyone else to believe it, that just sounds like insane, neurotic, that sounds like a panic attack to me. Just like, I need you all to believe that there's such a thing as a rare SAT and you must continue to believe it. To me, like, the people that are like, want to have some sort of reputation when all this is blown over, dismiss it as gambling, and they're like, oh, it's a bit of fun, like everyone, and maybe there's some money laundering involved, but
is this not the free market?
Yeah, but I mean, the free markets exist, but people have moral qualms as well, and millions of people do things every day that lose them money objectively just because they don't want to do it, because it's morally objectionable to them. So, I mean, you keep asking one thing that we keep not touching on that I really want to touch on, which is what happens. How do you enforce this?
Yeah, how do you enforce this?
So, my estimation is just miners need some sort of clear signal from the greater network. This stuff we don't want in there, and then it's the onus is on miners to say, yeah, fair enough. Thanks for letting us know. We're not going to put this stuff in there anymore because we understand that you don't want it and that you're in charge of the whole thing.
A bit like No 2x did.
No 2x is no.
But that was a signal to the miners, because at the time it was thought that miners were in control.
It's different because you're talking about hard forks there. That's a lot more cut and dry. Like, spam is never going to be like about consensus, and
right.
As much as like we're not going to do a fork in Bitcoin that says, oh, there's no more ordinals or there's no more inscriptions, because this is just dropping nuclear bombs on ants. It's just, it breaks you.
I was thinking more as a signal,
good. The signal is what you do with mempool policy. And as much as people will argue about that, it's always worked in the past. It's never been controversial, and it's never been tantamount to censorship. It's just basic pragmatic thinking, which is you need this thing to be usable for the purpose it was created. This spam is not the purpose it was created for. It's degrading the user experience of people that are trying to use it for the purpose it was designed for. Bitcoin is not here to make miners rich. Miners get paid to do a job. If they're going to start getting income on the side for doing something that's worse for the people finding the main source of income for them, that's an issue, and we need to have a chat. Like,
well, there's another issue that needs to be dealt with there. If this is a fad, and the block reward is boosted by, what is it, about 10-15% at the moment on average by fees?
yeah,
Say it's 20%. Well, we know the market for mining. We know the way
it's not anything like that big generally.
Whatever it is, whatever that number is.
Transaction fees remain around a third of a Bitcoin. So you're looking at about 5% of what miner income is. You're getting about $500,000 every block, and around 20 grand of that or something is transaction fees. And then a couple of percent of that is spam fees. So you're talking a very little amount of revenue.
So but then if it's so little, how is it really degrading the experience that much? Are we talking about therefore a 1 to 2% degrading of the experience?
Well,
which is important.
I don't know how you quantify that really. I think it's more that what it signals. I think it signals a break of because Bitcoin has this old divine incentive structure where everyone pulls in the same direction. When you have a break when you have a rift in the community where it's like any node that knows what it's doing doesn't want this stuff in there. They might be resigned to it and saying, we can't do anything about miners including it. Maybe we need to soft fork and that's not tenable, so we're not going to do it. But, nodes objectively do not want a chain filled with crap. People that want to do open lightning channels and do all this stuff do not want to have to compete with people storing JPEGs. That's a fact. It does nothing for them. I guess you can argue that miners are making more money, which makes hash rate higher, which improves one element of the security of the network, but I'm steel manning and it's a stretch. Miners getting paid to do things that aren't helpful to what financial users of Bitcoin are doing is more of like a well-funded attack than it is anything else. And it's been characterized otherwise. So I would stress that. Like ultimately you need a defense for like someone coming and paying miners to do bad things. Like it's not just about miner income. If you're a massive miner and I say, hey, mine empty blocks, don't process any transactions, reorg the network, I'll cover your nut. I'll pay for as much as is required. I'll overpay what you'd have been paid by being honest. There has to be some defense against that as a network. We can't just say, oh, money means people will always do the right thing. You have to have at least be long-term in your profit incentive, right? I can kill the golden goose today by trashing the blockchain and earning, 0.3% more in transaction fee revenue or something like that. I can do that, but Bitcoin is going to be worse. Everyone's going to be using it custodially because no one can afford to do real transactions prematurely because the technology is just not there for us to have shared UTXOs and all that stuff that maybe covenants provide us with and all that stuff. We know no one's doing that. I was talking about this before we went live, right? Like Lightning was really promising as a scaling technology. It is great. I use it in the way it was intended to, but I'm aware that no one else does. You've been around, Venezuela, El Salvador. What's people using Lightning? It's all Wallet of Satoshi. It's all custodial, all of it. No one is running a Lightning node. No one is sovereign over their own channels. Maybe they're using Phoenix and they at least have their own private keys, but they still need permission from async to use the whole network. It sucks. And I'm going off on a tangent here.
Fine. Okay.
But the point is, like, you need the technology and the understanding to be realistic for people to remain sovereign and to hold their own private keys. If you prematurely move to a world where 95% of the earth cannot afford to realistically use Bitcoin. This is why I say it mirrors old big blocker arguments. If it's just the case that people are going to be like, okay, I earn, $200 a month. That's my income. I don't want to have to spend $30 a month on Bitcoin transaction fees. Like if you're in that situation, you're just going to use a custodial wallet that deals with all that and makes it cheaper. And that is the world we're headed to by default anyway. I don't want to exacerbate that problem by filling up the chain with garbage from pump and dumps that don't care if they burn thousands of dollars moving sats around because they can make so much money in the short term. For me, it's very short-sighted for miners to go, yeah, this is all fine. It's all valid transactions. It's super short-sighted because there is no 21 million Bitcoin. There is no unconfiscatable if everyone is just using custodial wallets. This is a problem with ETFs. This is a problem with custodial wallets. This is a problem with prematurely expensive block space. We are still paying miners a fortune every 10 minutes in subsidy. They don't need to be sustained by transaction fee revenue. We're thinking in terms of decades and centuries here. I don't need miners to be making thousands of dollars every 10 minutes from transaction fee revenue. Not yet, because the technology is not there yet for people to be able to pay that. And it's just premature, and it's a degradation of the whole structure of the game theory of the network.
So do you think something's been lost in the culture of Bitcoin?
Absolutely.
Because there isn't enough objection to this. And
Certainly.
it's funny, like the more time I spend in Bitcoin, the more principled I think I become. And it's taken me probably longer than everyone else, and all the criticism is fair. But honestly, I'm loving this, and it's the right signal for where I think I should align my principles of the show. Is called What Bitcoin Did. But for me, it's more than just what Bitcoin did, because what Bitcoin can be anything that's on Bitcoin. It should be about solving money. And when I first came in properly, 2017, they're very, very strong principles, even on both sides, big and small block, right? There were principles about money. Mm-hmm. So whether you were on the wrong side of that debate, you were still principled about money. You wanted it to be good money. It's just your view on what good money was arguably wrong, because you didn't understand or care enough about decentralization. But when this kind of potential civil war is a potential civil war, it is a civil war, whatever you want to call it, isn't now based on money. It's based on, some people want it to be money, some want it to be bullshit. Like, isn't money. And so I feel like, therefore, we've potentially lost something. There's been a degradation of the Bitcoin culture, and I don't know why.
No, this is I very much agree with you, because, like I said, what separates Bitcoin from crypto, in my opinion, is a respect for the decentralization of the enforcement of the rules of the system, which is TLDR. We respect the fact that we have nodes, lots of them. If you have an incredibly high hash rate, we're holding a hoop up, 10,000 kilometers in the air, and we're expecting miners to jump through it. If miners are jumping through hoops like that, what's the point in, solving a very hard question, if it's asked if no one cares whether you got the answer right or not? The point is, everyone cares. Like, you did that work, you solved that block, and you satisfied the demand of tens of thousands of nodes. It was worth doing the work. If you attack the ultimate arbiters of what's the point in getting a university degree if no one cares that you got a degree? It's a waste of your time and effort, right? You need there to be an infrastructure around it that will respect the work that went into getting that. Like, I'm not talking about fiat education or degrading and all that. So if you mine Bitcoin and there's only a few nodes around because you now have adopted a culture, a shitcoin culture that doesn't care about a plethora of nodes and widely enforced rules, who cares that you solved a block? Who cares that you met all the very difficult requirements? Because you're satisfying the demands of a small group of people that don't really care. So you can't have that culture for that reason. Nodes are important in that regard, but also upgrades. Bitcoin has to continually upgrade and it needs maintenance. It's software. It's not just a thing you design and you forget about it. Like, basic reasons, like operating systems, like Bitcoin today does not work on Mac OS 14 point whatever that's going to exist in 5 years. It doesn't work on that. You need maintenance. And when you have, I'm sorry, but every single upgrade brings about the different priorities of different parts, different contingencies in the Bitcoin ecosystem. You have miners, you have node operators, you have pools, you have software like Umbrel and Start9, you have devs, you have exchanges. All of these are not magically just aligned and agree on everything. So in the past, when we did things like SegWit upgrade, we butted heads with other people in the ecosystem, like Brian Armstrong running Coinbase and Barry Silbert, and all these people didn't want to do what we wanted to do, and ultimately we had a war over it. And the one contingent one, which is the nodes, that said we don't want to take on the burden of bigger blocks. We don't want to do it. Blocks did get bigger as a result of SegWit anyway. That was some sort of compromise, but it's not really understood as being that. So it doesn't all magically align. So when you bring in a massive like plethora of people that couldn't care less about sound money that come in because they want to store JPEGs on the chain. If those people are doing valid transactions and they're Bitcoiners, what happens when you want to upgrade the moneyness of Bitcoin and therefore make it more expensive to store your JPEG? Naturally, they should just be opposed to it. I mean, so are we comfortable asking the permission of inscribers whether we can have CTV or checksig from stack?
No.
Because no,
And I'm not comfortable with them proposing upgrades.
like OpCat.
Yeah, OpCat.
Right, because it suits their needs. It doesn't suit our needs. And you have to draw a line at some point. You can't mildly tolerate it. You have to decide whether or not they're components of it. Like what about the ETF guys? What if the ETF owners say, we want to impose some sort of identity system within Bitcoin because it's good for our compliance? We have to be comfortable saying, fuck off.
Fuck off, Larry.
Right. We have to be comfortable with that. We've told Brian Armstrong to fuck off. We've told all of the New York Agreement people to piss off. We've even told Core to piss off at times before. Like they were not happy with the user-activated soft fork that finally pushed the envelope with SegWit. Like Core were just saying, all right, it looks like we're not having SegWit because the miners won't activate it. So we told the miners to screw off, the exchanges, Bitcoin Core, everyone was against us, but the node users eventually asserted themselves. I know people have different understandings of the history here, but this is at least somewhat accurate. And the nodes asserted themselves. They said, this is what we want. We want SegWit. We want to fix for transaction malleability. We want Lightning Network. We want bidirectional payment channels. We want all this stuff. And we don't care about any component of the Bitcoin community that doesn't want this. We don't care. You're not Bitcoiners, essentially. So, if you're going to have a passive attitude about it and accept people that are using it for another use case, that means ossification. It means we can't ever upgrade again beyond basic maintenance. Like if you want to have this, the covenant's proponents that want to increase economic density, saying the way we outcompete spam is we make it so that, just like how a Lightning Network, if you're dealing with the Lightning Network, rather than me make two transactions where I pay $2 worth of Bitcoin for the first one and $2 for the second one, and that's $4 of transaction fees to do two transactions. The first one could be me opening a Lightning channel. I can then do tens or hundreds of transactions on Lightning. Then I can close the channel, pay another $2, and that increased my economic density, right? Does that make sense? Like you've done so much transactions and you only paid, your blockchain footprint was tiny. That in theory makes you more competitive. It makes the economic use case of Bitcoin more competitive versus people just storing data on chain. So they should be against it naturally because it makes people trying to use it for one purpose have an economic advantage relative to people trying to use it for another purpose. So all that is to say, if you want to have UTXO sharing and covenants and things like that, people just storing arbitrary data on the base layer are naturally going to be against all that stuff if they're just looking out for their own interests. And I'm comfortable telling them, I don't care. You're not Bitcoiners. The monetary use case and anything that upgrades or makes that more efficient is to your detriment. And I'm fine with that because I don't want you guys here in the first place. If we get too passive about this thing and there are too many arbitrary data schemes in Bitcoin, apparently the standard on the mailing list, as far as I see with Peter Todd, dismissing, Jeremy Rubin's CTV, he's saying, unless it's clear how this opcode upgrades users for all users of the Bitcoin ecosystem, it does not have consensus and we reject it. This is apparently the standard for it. I don't think it really is, but if that's the standard, what's to stop all the inscribers just coming along and saying, sorry, you're going to degrade the user experience and the cost of storing arbitrary data on chain, which is all legitimate transactions. So how do you do it? I don't think you can.
So what has been lost in the culture? Is it principles?
I think prioritization of nodes, number one. You're bringing in a shitcoin culture that doesn't understand the importance of decentralized enforcement of the rule set. If you adopt that culture, you lose what is sacred about Bitcoin because it manifests very quickly as Bitcoin just turning into a shitcoin. I call it hyper shitcoinization.
Hey, listen, do you know what? I was telling Danny the quote that's at the start of your interview with Preston which I'll get wrong, but along the lines of when you have a friend get in touch with you and they say to you, "Hey, I've lost money on Bitcoin," you ask them what they bought, and it was like Bitcoin Cash or Dogecoin, some shitcoin.
Yeah.
And you're like, "No, that's not Bitcoin." You could say that, but by bringing shitcoins into Bitcoin, they might legitimately feel like they've lost money on Bitcoin. And I'm like, I'm with you.
Well, I did make this point on the Preston podcast. Like, drawing a line between Bitcoin and shitcoins was difficult. It took us years and it didn't work that well. You still have people saying exactly what you said, which is, "Oh, my cousin's into Bitcoin. He lost loads of money. And it was really because they bought Dogecoin or whatever." And you're like, well, that isn't Bitcoin. You're using Bitcoin as a generic term for cryptocurrencies. Like, it's not. So if drawing the line between Bitcoin and crypto is hard, what about drawing the line between Bitcoin and shitcoins on top of Bitcoin that are called things like sats? Like, there's a token called sats on top of Bitcoin, which is not the sat. It's just something deceptively named to make people think they're owning Satoshis when they're not. They're owning a token called the sat.
Someone actually did that, didn't they?
Yeah. Like, this is deliberately deceptive, and it makes. I don't want this. It's confusing and alien enough to people as it is. I don't want to bring this stuff in. I don't want to have anything but hostility towards it because it's deceptive in nature. It's immoral, and I don't want to take the approach that we can't do anything about it because we really can. Every time Ocean finds a block, there isn't this spam in there, and the minute you demonstrate hostility to it as a general network, most of it just goes away.
My understanding of the developer hierarchy. A lot of it's built on social capital, and naturally, some of that is how long you've been in Bitcoin. So people like Peter Willey and Andrew Polstra have very good reputation. They've been around a long time. Some of it's based on also the quality of work you've done, but you build social capital. Have people who are developers but proponents or ambivalent about ordinals and inscriptions been able to build social capital within the developer community?
Luke has. He's the longest tenured Bitcoin core guy around, but he's also classically a polarizing figure. To me, like, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Like, Core were very ambivalent back in the days of BIP 148 and activating SegWit and fighting everyone. Core were not generally in favor of it. Greg Maxwell was not. Peter Todd was not. These are very respected high-up figures. I don't know what Peter Wooler's opinion of it was. As it was probably just ambivalence, and I'm sorry if that's incorrect, but it definitely wasn't support. Generally, when it comes to controversial stuff, Core just sort of go, not my business. And I respect that. But Luke is, always one to suddenly get very, very polarized in his position and, take an emphatic position one way or the other, right? So back in the fork wars, BIP 148 was this niche, silly movement, a bit like how anti-spam looks at the moment, until Luke wrote a post on Reddit saying, we're doing this thing. And we have an asymmetric advantage because, we can eat your chain. You can never eat ours. That was one of these hard things to maybe, probably a bit out of scope for this conversation. But so, and that was it. That was the watershed moment. And suddenly people threw their weight behind BIP 148. There was an exchange in the UK called Bittylicious. I remember he showed up in the chat one day and was like, how do I compile this thing? We just had support from people. Like, once he threw his weight behind it, it was there. And again, David versus Goliath, no one thought we would win. And then on the final hour, all the miners start, signaling BIP 91, which is this convoluted way of saying, all right, you win. But we save face. And I love this whole part of the story. It was James Hilliard and his whole placation of the egos. He made it look like everyone won when really it was just the nodes that won. So they never adopted the nodes rule set. They adopted a different rule set. They adopted the same rule set under a different name so that they could save face. It was really quite funny, but I'm not going to get into it. But so I'd say it's the same as it always is. Core are basically ambivalent. A lot of people in the anti-spam camp are accusing them of malice and compromise and all that stuff. I don't think it's that. I think they just want to do their work. They want to get on with the little, the housekeeping of maintaining Bitcoin Core. And they don't want to be dragged into these horrible political battles. And they never have, and they never will. And I don't really expect them to. It does suck that we lost the sort of vision of Vladimir, who would sort of take a more active position on it, or Satoshi even. But I mean, there's a trade-off there. If Satoshi came around and was like, this stuff's bad,
We don't want that.
we'd fix it in 5 minutes, but then we'd be centralized and with this massive, you don't want that. Like, I'm sure Satoshi, if he's around, looked at the battles in Bitcoin, looked at Craig Wright, was like on the edge of his seat, like, I have to tell the world this is all bullshit. Like, I can fix this in 2 minutes, but always had the discipline to know that the community figuring out this stuff in a messy, decentralized way is more important than fixing it, but with one guy at the helm, a la Vitalik saying, all right, this is Ethereum, and Ethereum Classic is not Ethereum anymore. Like, it's super efficient, but it's super centralized, and it creates weak points of failure that you can't have them in Bitcoin. No matter how bad it gets, you can't do that. So it's on us to kind of just take responsibility for it. And I think we will. I think it's just about communication. That ultimately, I think that's what failed in the block wars as well, the block size wars. I actually think Roger Ver and Jihan Wu really did want what's best for Bitcoin. I actually think they do. And we were all just talking past each other, and people get polarized and entrenched in their positions. Roger's super stubborn guy, but I think he's wrong. But I don't think he's not like waking up thinking, I'm going to attack Bitcoin today. Like, I think I know you agree. Like, I think he thinks he's right. But so I think it's just about good communication. It's like, look, what really matters here? The nodes matter. The nodes, Mara pool, you're putting stuff in blocks that the nodes aren't relaying around the network for a reason. Like, let's have a conversation about why you're doing that. How much money are you really making doing it? What's the context of miner income at the moment anyway? How significant is it? I think, like, you can make money being OFAC compliant, right? You can save on regulatory burden. Your lawyers advise you this will save you, this will keep you out of court for ages. You'll save millions of dollars in legal fees if you're OFAC compliant. There's a financial incentive to do it, but the network said, do not do that. And they said, all right. Like, we didn't have to fork anything. Like,
so it sounds like you're saying we need a movement.
Yeah, I mean, there is a movement, right?
Okay,
but it's being mischaracterized, and I'm trying to, this is why I'm on here, trying to sort of explain why we're doing what we're doing. And it's complicated and it's technical. Like, this is the juxtaposition of politics and deep technical conversations. It's really unnatural to have this kind of chat. But I mean, we were all big blockers at one point. Like Gavin Andreessen, Mike Hearn, they were saying, we cannot scale Bitcoin. We need blocks to be at least 100x bigger. Okay, only 20x bigger. And like, I'm pretty sure we all agreed with that at one point. And then over the years, listening to podcasts and having reasonable discussions and being practical about making Bitcoin remotely usable and getting rid of sort of very shallow ideological appeals, you sort of go, oh, all right, well, maybe these guys have a point actually. And I get DMs all the time on Twitter of people saying, when Ocean first came out, I thought you guys were just, CIA op to censor Bitcoin and all that stuff. I get it. I understand what you're doing now. It makes sense. Like, most people aren't aware that their nodes filter out consensus valid transactions all the time anyway. Most people were not even aware of that. They thought what your node accepts totally matches what's consensus about goes in blocks. Most people thought they were one and the same. They didn't realize, like I drew the always has been meme with someone, it's like, wait, my node is filtering out consensus valid transactions? Always has been. Like, you have to learn how your node works and why what that is very different to a government coming to Ocean and saying, don't include coin joins or don't include transactions that originate from Iranian Bitcoin exchanges. That's censorship, but it's nothing like what we're doing. It looks the same if you're not willing to look into the distinction. But ultimately it comes down to, please don't degrade what the word censor means, because censorship is a horrific thing in Bitcoin. We don't want it. The network's wide open to it right now. But it strictly comes as a result of government pressure, the state, authorities saying these transactions, these people are bad. That's not what we're doing. I'm not saying the wizards...
OFAC is censorship.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And it's disrespect of nodes, because you're saying, even though you nodes relayed this around the network happily, we're not putting it in blocks. That's undermining. And doing the reverse, saying we're putting this stuff in blocks even though you wouldn't relay it, is exactly the same disrespect. It's just the flip side of the same coin. And I don't know why the outrage is not there. I think it's It's just literally because this hasn't been pointed out. And so that's why I'm happy to do this and, share my perspective on it.
Well, it does take time as well. Like I say, when it first came around, I was like, oh, this just sounds like bullshit. And then I had a bunch of conversations, spoke to some people, and they're like, no, this is good for a variety of reasons. It's good for miners, it's good for fees, it's good for new use cases. We're going to be able to do a lot more things with Bitcoin. It can be more, and then I just became, okay, well, I kind of came to my conclusion. I came with shitcoins, right? The reason, you might not know this, but when I first launched the show, we cover shitcoins, and I would talk.
What shitcoin did?
No, it was what Bitcoin did. But I would talk to Charlie Lee about Litecoin, and I would talk to Fluffy Pony about Monero. Actually, I still occasionally would do that. But we would look into Ethereum. We'd talk about which coins to trade, and then what happens during the fork wars. I interviewed a couple of Bitcoin Cash people, and I got some pressure on me. And I just came to this kind of simple question to myself. It's like, okay, I own all these shit coins as well as Bitcoin. Which one am I using for a purpose? Oh, Bitcoin, I'm actually buying and selling things with Bitcoin. I'm using it, and I'm storing money with Bitcoin, and I believe that's going to be worth more in the future. That's why I'm happy not to sell it, right? Came to that kind of conclusion. And then I looked at the shit coins. I was like, oh, the only reason I have these is because I hope they go up in value and I can sell them. And so then I was just like, yeah, okay, Bitcoin's the only one of value. That's the one I'm going to use. And I think that's the kind of conclusion I've come to also with what's happening now is like the only use case that I have and want out of Bitcoin is monetary transactions, okay, and the store of my wealth. I don't have any desire to own a JPEG or do any inscriptions or have any BRC. I think it's all fucking nonsense. And so, but it's taken time. And how long have we been covering this now?
This topic in particular,
yeah,
at least 6 months properly, I would say.
6 months, and I've come to that, and now it's come from a position I was like, okay, I reject that. To this interview and listen to your interview with Preston, actually hardening me around this. So it's
changed my thinking, definitely. Like, I've been very passive with it.
It's a valid transaction.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. It's like valid transaction, not breaking the rules of consensus. I was of the camp that I think monetary transactions will eventually just price them out anyway, so let's not care. But this has made me think, I'm actually just being lazy.
Yeah.
You've got to be a good steward of this thing. I like Greg Maxwell's quote that says, the best way to ensure Bitcoin's failure is to assume it's preordained success. You can't just be ambivalent that it's going to be fine. Like it's the double-edged sword of freedom and responsibility. You cannot have sovereign wealth if you're not able to, store your own private keys and have a, solid redundant backup and all that stuff. If you can't meet that responsibility, you don't get the freedom either. So if you want to be ambivalent about Bitcoin and go, it'll be fine. Like, I get the wisdom of that. Like, don't worry about things. Like, be a Zen guru and all that. That ain't my nature. Like, I've been fighting these wars forever. I will worry about this thing.
But what you said about the potential for it to influence upgrades to Bitcoin, that's where it really landed with me.
That's the problem, right? Because if you get to me, I liken it, and this is a super unpopular analogy, but I can't find a better one. Help me out if you can.
Okay.
Like, if you want America, if you want freedom as a cultural value, it always exists in contrast to other nations which don't have that. And you have to draw a line around what the thing is. And if you don't respect that boundary, this is the disconnect and the thing people can't reconcile. How can you have limitations in an environment that respects freedom? The thing is, you can't have freedom if you don't draw a line around the thing that's free, because it won't stay free. You just have chaos. You need strictly defined rules to keep a thing free. So, if you want Bitcoin to remain uncensorable financial transactions, unconfiscatable, you have to make it just that. If you try and open it up, it's sort of leftism disease where you're like, okay, everything is valid and just do whatever you like. And that's not freedom. That's just a mess. That's what you end up with.
Bitcoin.
Right. Like, it's just a degrading of all of its boundaries. It just becomes a useless version of everything. Like, it doesn't, do you know what I mean?
No, I do. Look, and like I said, I've become hardened to it now. I mean, look, we just went to Malawi, and when we landed, we were told they've just devalued the currency by 44%.
2 days before we got there.
And we're there as Bitcoiners to go and see Bitcoin mining and try and understand how Bitcoin can help the country. And it's the same everywhere we've been. You listed, El Salvador, Venezuela, and we've been to Argentina, but we've been to all these places. People know, I talk about it all the time. But when we're going to these places, we're going to places that we believe need good money. And it isn't like some people they kind of gaslight when they say, oh yeah, but the guy in the village, he doesn't really need Bitcoin, and sorry, bear with me, it's super volatile. I've been trying to start to articulate there is present Bitcoin and end state Bitcoin. And what I'm saying is somewhere like Malawi, most people there don't need present state Bitcoin. They need end state Bitcoin, whereby they have an economy that is protected from the government and debasement because they're a Bitcoin country. So they need end state. And all these places we travel to, all these fucking terrible things I've seen, and I've seen some terrible things, right, come from the money. And so when I see who's pro-ordinals or pro-inscriptions, they're people who come from a place of privilege. They come from a place that they're probably net wealthy. They want to get even more wealthy, and they're grifting the Bitcoin system and gaslighting people just to make more money. And that's working in opposition to everything that I believe we need to do with Bitcoin. So I'm becoming hardened to it. And maybe we do just need to tell some more people to fuck off. Tell Udi to fuck off. Tell Eric Hall to fuck off. But my problem is a lot of my friends in Bitcoin are actually pro-ordinal as well.
Well, why? There's two reasons. Like, first off, let me just amplify what you said, because I really agree. It's not a game. Bitcoin is life and death for billions of people, and there is no one in Venezuela that's excited about cats on the freaking chain, right? Like, this is a mockery of the seriousness of what people are trying to do here. Everyone that has a lapse attitude towards this stuff has a very cushy, comfortable fiat life. I've got my credit card. I've got my house is insured. I pay, I've got a mortgage. It's affordable. I've got a truck. I leased it. My fiat life is comfortable. I can book airline tickets. I can do whatever I need. Like, I've got multiple credit cards. If one of them gets canceled, I've got the other one. That's not available to like 4 or 5 billion people. And these people, Bitcoin is a serious shot for these people of actually getting out from hyperinflation, from denial of access to any sort of financial infrastructure. And it's not something that deserves to be mocked with all this bullshit experimentation, if at best. If we want to describe it as that rather than scamming, which is what we know it really is, it's just an insult to the seriousness of this project. And I certainly don't want upgrades making what they do more efficient or anything like that. It's go and play in something that's designed for games if you really are serious about it, but they're not, right? So I totally celebrate what you say there, and I totally agree with it. I find it insulting, and I find it undermining, and it reeks of privilege. Like, people that are it is just a game to them, and I will tell these people to fuck off. And they have a history of, advising people leave their money on FTX and Binance and all that stuff, and I got to check a pass in some of those bits. Well, look, man,
we live and learn.
Yeah, you used to advocate for BlockFi, right? Like,
I sold ads for BlockFi.
Right, fair enough. Look, I'm not going to comment on that.
Like, I've owned it.
I believe you have. I don't know what it is, but I certainly believe it. But you made a point at the end there where you're talking about this. You need a galvanized culture around Bitcoin being a very specific thing. It's just like that old psychological phenomenon, right? Like, you got entrepreneurs, they build stuff and then they disappear. It's like, that's what Satoshi was. Like, he built it. He wasn't interested in maintaining it. Like, I don't think he had that disposition, and it's for the best that he didn't. And then you've got like these hyper-conservative figures like Luke and people like that no, this is what it is and it cannot ever be anything else. Like, and you have to respect that. Like, you've got to conserve what it is. You can't just blast it wide open and expect it to remain, sovereign money. If you just start pissing in it, like, it's not viable. You can't have that approach. And the people that do are not really interested in what it offers in the first place. They never really understood it. Or if they did, they just sort of overestimate its resilience.
Can you steelman a good argument for them?
For arbitrary data storage?
Yeah.
I mean, so here are the two arguments they make. So you have practical argument, which is you can't do anything to stop it. So don't even try, which I call the nirvana fallacy, right? Like, demonstrably 0.1% of the hash rate doesn't want it at the moment. That's why they're mining with us. And that's a bootstrapping problem, as I said.
Hold on, I got to call you back on that one, because that's why I asked you if that's why people are mining with you, and you said no. Actually, there's the economic incentives. I believe they are,
but we
mining
haven't
with you for that.
We haven't established that there's an economic incentive. Certainly, most people thought
but
if you mine with ocean, you'll make less. That was the assumption.
Yeah, but when I said to you before previously, is it for ethical reasons? You said no.
I don't.
You didn't think it was. Look, I'm okay with it, but I'm just going to tell you, I think people are mining.
No,
with you
I don't want to be inconsistent here. I think it's too early to tell why.
Okay.
But at least I'll rephrase it. 0.1% of the network certainly doesn't have an ideological objection to the way we construct our blocks, because then presumably it would be unpalatable. But look, mining with ocean's a pain in the ass at the moment. Let's be honest, because our hash rate is so low, and because we don't pay you regardless of what happens, we need to find blocks. And the original purpose of mining in a pool is cash flow, like I said. So if our pool goes unlucky and we don't find a block for a week, which has happened, you've got no money that week. And then you need to make up your bad luck the following week and find, 3 or 4 blocks. Are we going to do that? Maybe. Suddenly all that randomness is back. So anyone mining with us is doing so because they just want to. And it might be the transaction, it might be the transparency, and it might be the transparency of blocks, of what we're going to put in the blocks, or it might be the verifiability of the payout splits, but it can just be alignment on the ideological issues too, right?
Okay, I want to ask you about CTV, by the way, while we've got you here. But before I do that...
Let me finish the answer to your last question, actually, because it can either be practical, there's nothing you can do about it, so just earn the money while it's here, or it's ideological, where they say, no, this is a slippery slope to censorship. Those are the two. If you ask me to steel man the pro-spam position or the ambivalent to spam position.
Do you not think there's a third one whereby they think Bitcoin is more than money, it's a protocol and it just can do other useful things?
Yeah, that's valid. But I mean, we've never been particularly hostile to non-hostile actors. Like people that like Mike in Space that come along and they're like, hey, I want to bloat the UTXO set and make running a node more expensive deliberately. It makes sense to be hostile to that. Whereas like open timestamps, Peter Todd's thing, no one is like, oh, we can't have that in the blockchain. Timestamping data to prove it existed at a certain point. It's a pretty interesting use case for Bitcoin. It's not a token. It doesn't have its own pump and dump scamminess, right? It doesn't really affect anything. I think we're all right with it.
So is it spam though? And is it spam we're okay with?
I don't know. Like I said, you can't objectively define this stuff, but you can't afford to just pretend there is no such thing as spam either.
Yeah, okay.
So I find that pretty interesting. So yeah, you have those. That's a good point. So you have practical objection, which is you can't do anything about it, so might as well earn the money. You have ideological objection, which this is censorship. That to me is just a reflection of not understanding how your node has always worked. You've always had a hostile attitude. We've always had a hostile attitude in forums. The way the software's been designed, the reason the witness discount isn't bigger than it is was all deliberately contrived to make the network hostile to storage of arbitrary data. There's never been any characterization of that as censorship. It's censorship-resistant money. It's not censorship-resistant file storage. That's a massively important distinction to make, even if there is no black and white line between file storage and just transactions. And then the third point of yours, which is genuine use case for storing arbitrary data. Again, I did say earlier, store whatever data you want, but find other ways to do it. Even if it's the world's most valuable data, even if Julian Assange uploads something into the blockchain and then gets Epsteined the next day or something like that. Even then, I'm going to be like, this is not the place for that data. It doesn't really, this is why I don't get hung up on the scammy element of it too much, because it really is just not what Bitcoin's for, regardless of what the data is. Is that a financial transaction? No, it's not. It's a hash of a trove of WikiLeaks documents. All right, I love that it exists, but I'm still going to rather it was a torrent file rather than stored in the Bitcoin blockchain.
Fair. I think the TLDR of it is Bitcoin is money. We're trying to make the best money in the world. Let's cut out all the shit that damages that.
Let's not degrade its moneyness. Yeah. Okay. It's not for other stuff. And the more it's for other stuff, the less it's for the intended purpose. You can't have everything. And that's another nirvana fallacy. Bitcoin can be everything. And that is one thing I push back against from the arguments I've seen people make to you, which is, it attracts more people into the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Rizzo made that point quite passionately.
Right. And this is the argument Brian Armstrong made for years when he was talking about crypto, like let's bring people into crypto and then they eventually end up in Bitcoin. No, what happens is you bring them into crypto, they get scammed, and then they go, I got scammed on Bitcoin, and they leave the entire space, even though they didn't do anything.
But I get the point. We don't need to
net negative.
Yeah, we don't need to do that. Like, that's the truth. We don't need it.
I think it's also an own goal. I think if you bring people into a confusing Ruby Goldberg machine of scams, you know, it's buy a cold card, you know, a seed sign or whatever, store some Bitcoin, that's it. If you want to be like a hardcore Bitcoiner because you got introduced right, great. Like I got into Bitcoin in 2011, as I mentioned at the beginning. The scams around then were laughable. Like it was really easy to not fall for it. The ICO hype, though, back when I know you interviewed Keith, right? And he was talking about when he got in. He got in 2017. He fell for the Vitalik Kool-Aid, like, oh, wow, an autistic genius. Like, this guy must be 800 IQ and all that stuff. It's all bollocks. Like, it's all nonsense. And it takes years because it's all so complicated. Bitcoin, as complicated it is still not that complicated. It's all kind of simple principles. Do you have the private keys? You can represent them as 12 or 24 words or whatever. Don't let anyone else find them out. Don't upload them to anything digital. Manifest them as, you know, Bitcoin addresses, send Bitcoins there. Okay, walk away and don't touch it for 5 years. Like, that's not that complicated. It's still alien to most people, and you still have to unlearn how money works normally. But like, understanding smart contracts on ETH and all that stuff is just infinitely more complicated. And then it becomes, we spent so long on the how, or we forgot whether, what is that? Like, we spent so long discussing whether we could that we forgot to ask whether we should. That's like all of the crypto hype, right? And, you know, what was the overall point I was making?
I mean, look, well, I was TLDR in it. And look, the truth is, what I need from Bitcoin is so simple.
Yeah.
I need to be able to send Bitcoin, receive Bitcoin, and hold it securely. Now, the holding securely is very good. I've got great deep cold storage, multi-sig. It's brilliant. I've also got some pretty good storage if I want to be pretty mobile with it, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's a hardware wallet or a software wallet. And all I want is people to make that better. So make it faster with scaling and make it more secure. But I don't want it to do anything else because that's all I fucking need. That's all my kids need. I'm not thinking, do you know what? Like what I'm thinking about right now with my kids is, and interestingly, my son works in Bitcoin now, and I said to him today, I said, one of the great things about you working in Bitcoin is you're learning about Bitcoin so that the day when I'm gone, I can entrust you with the responsibility of taking ownership of that Bitcoin and what to do with it. And that's great.
That's a constant concern of mine, man.
Yeah. What I don't need to, I'm not thinking about is, I need to educate my kids on ordinals and inscriptions and having this shit in 20 years. It's not crossing my mind. I don't want to think about it. Bitcoin for me, send, receive, store, and constantly make it better at doing those three things.
Right.
What else?
So don't let anyone tell you you're being narrow-minded as a result of that. You've reinvented money. It's now perfect. This is enough. Like, we don't need to...
This is the flashiest looking episode ever.
Yeah, I mean...
We've had a butler deliver coffee, electric curtains.
Is this not normal for you then? Am I on the most high profile?
This is one of the flashiest settings. I mean, we've had some great settings. We actually recorded outside with Vortex earlier. We're going to do them both outside. I'm glad we did this one inside now. We've recorded on a plane. We're always looking at interesting.
Oh, really?
You never saw that one?
No.
We interviewed. We were flying from Malawi to Kenya, and we're on a plane with Jeff Booth and Gladstone. We're like, let's just make a fucking show here. So we got the cameras out, got the mics out. We made a show at 30,000 feet.
Nice.
But yeah, look, again, I'm going to be so principled about this. Send, receive, store, and constantly make it better at that.
Yeah. Uncensorable financial transactions, unconfiscatable money. It's got nothing to do with storing JPEGs on the chain. It's not, and we don't want to make it conducive to that. Like, Bitcoin doesn't support this, and you're hacking your way around the fact that it doesn't support it. There's a reason you have to hack your way around it. There's a reason that you have to trick nodes into accepting arbitrary data inside script that can never be executed. That should just tell you, I'm using a tool without it being used for its intended purpose. It's not like a hammer. Whereas if someone wants to use it to prop up a shelf or something, that doesn't degrade the experience of other people using it to hammer in nails, because they're not operating in a network of hammers. Whereas if someone's using Bitcoin for some purpose that is other than the intended use case, it actually makes it worse for people trying to use it for the money purpose. So like, do you want to be hostile to it or conducive to it? So it's classic political polarization. You're either with us or against us. There isn't ambivalence is not an option because that's tacit compliance. If you have an ambivalent attitude towards spam, it becomes part of the culture. It degrades Bitcoin overall, and it basically means we can't make progress when it comes to scaling Bitcoin's moneyness. And like assuming it will just sort of peter out on its own, I think depends what it is, because spam is forever death, taxes, and shitcoins. They are there's always going to be there. It's just it will iterate, like and it will get stupider each time. Like ICOs, really, I did think that was the stupidest thing we could ever see. Then NFTs, it just gets stupider and stupider, and like the art is insultingly bad. And it's only getting worse. Like it's outrage marketing. They just want to do the most offensively awful stuff. They want to be provocative because it just creates free marketing hype. And unfortunately, I have to give them all this airtime and acknowledge them. You know, acknowledging rare sats brings about the illusion that there is such a thing as a rare sat, right? So, like, but I mean, you were going to ask about covenants and all that stuff.
Is there anything you wanted to ask about this that we haven't covered?
No, I think we've gone pretty deep there.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
We could do a whole another show another time, but just really want to get your quick opinion on covenants. My understanding is that most people want to expect them to come. Don't really need to define what they are. Jeremy has a proposal that didn't seem to get through. What's kind of like your view on covenants, where we're at, where it's going to come, blah, blah, blah?
So I'll offer my perspective on it. Though I will say there are just so many people that know a lot more about it than I do.
Okay.
And I definitely would listen to them over me. But nonetheless, I feel like I've got some experience in the space, and it's probably at least valuable hearing what I have to say on it. So I'll offer it. I think just talking practically, theoretically, UTXO sharing, lower interactivity, ability to unilaterally exit from any sort of scheme, great in theory. In practice, I would question what's ultimately likely to happen from it. And I use Lightning as my sort of template for how do these things work in practice. So Lightning on paper is wicked. Everyone should be using it. Everyone should be using it the way I think they should be using it, which is running a Lightning node, opening a channel, doing your own management, paying 2 sats every time you want to move money around. Fantastic. Like on paper, that's how it works. You've been to Venezuela, you've been to El Salvador, you know that's not how anyone actually uses it. They all use Blink. No one even uses Chivo because it sucks. They all use Wallet of Satoshi. It's none of that, or they all use Phoenix, right? And Phoenix is expensive to the point where if you're using it, sometimes you might as well have just been on chain if it's a low transaction fee environment. So that being the case, Bitcoin is a much simpler thing than any UTXO sharing scheme, and most people use that custodially. So, like, my hope for what we can get, I've seen Reardon Code talk about it on Stefan Lavara's podcast, talking about there's this many billions of people, there's this much space for this many UTXOs. I get it all on paper, but I'm just so skeptical at this point and so jaded from people's ability to actually leverage these technologies to their fullest extent to maximize UTXO ownership and actual control over the thing, that it gives way to sort of fatigue and, skepticism, if you will, about what we'd actually get from this thing if we implemented it. Because, I spoke to Nifty about it, and she's like, oh, it's just boys, getting excited about new toys in Bitcoin, and in reality, who's actually going to use any of these things? Like, it might be, I'd say 1% of Bitcoiners are using Lightning, and 1% of those users are running their own nodes and doing their own channel management. That's crap, and it should have been better than that. Granted, Lightning requires a higher degree of interactivity. It's easier to lose your money on Lightning than the theoretical things we can do with Arc and the proposals enabled by Covenants, which again look great on paper and hopefully have a lower degree of interactivity. So in theory, it's easier for people to use them than Lightning. But I've seen people like yourself are great examples, right? Because you're like ruthlessly practical about how much people are actually going to be using these things the way they're intended, and how realistic, how we need to manage our expectations, right? Like, I think the fear ultimately that comes from Shinobi and Reardon Code and so many of us, and myself included, and all the big blockers where I align with them, is we want people to control their own UTXOs. We really want that. We don't want people just using third-party custodians, because then we're not censorship resistant. We're not, unconfiscatable. There's 21 million becomes meaningless, because how many of them, like, are they running a fractional reserve? I don't know. Like, we really want to avoid that, but, the idea that we can stop it, it's definitely a battle that we should never give up, but I want to manage expectations at the same time. Like, how many years before CTV and CheckSig from Stack assuming they even get merged despite all the, opposition to them, manifest in something like ARC or other UTXO sharing proposals where people can realistically run these things, and there's the infrastructure, the wallets using them, all that stuff gets built up and it's got realistic usage. And let's just be realistic. It's just so unlikely. But again, there's no other low-hanging fruit. So go have at it. Also, on using social heuristics, which is embarrassing to do, but like, I'm constantly butting heads with sandwich heads on Twitter that are obsessed with Rubens, because, Jeremy, for some reason, there seems to be this rift between people take this position on spam that I do and people that are pro CTV or pro L-enhance or any of these things. I don't know why I'm coming against such opposition here, because naturally we have exactly the same incentive, which is to optimize Bitcoin's usability for financial transactions. They want to increase economic density with things like what Lightning Network does and shared UTXOs. I want to just do a more crude thing as well, which is get rid of the other use cases so that there's just naturally more space for financial transactions. So to me, there's an alignment there that I don't understand why there's, like, initially the sort of spam apologists came at us saying, you're taking valuable mental bandwidth away from the conversation around activating covenants towards, this bullshit fight against spam that you can't win anyway. How dare you? You're only allowed to think about one thing. And then all the anti-spam people, not really myself, but I'm sorry, it's a valid argument. If we're going to do things like Taproot and SegWit and there's unintended consequences of them that we're not prepared to fix, it makes us a lot more hesitant to do other covenants or just covenants in general, or any other modification or soft fork to Bitcoin. If there are unintended consequences of it, we don't have super high confidence that we can get any sort of consensus around fixing those issues. It does inspire a lack of confidence. Like, new toy, great. Taproot, new toy. Oh dear, unintended consequence. Again, Luke will lambast me for this because it's nothing to do with Taproot, but here we are. People are using what's happened through recent soft forks to store arbitrary data. We can't get consensus around closing that door. So that makes us concerned about doing more soft fork upgrades, because on paper, nothing is wrong with CTV, or maybe something's wrong with CheckSig from Stack. You need both of them for, APO mimicry, which improves Lightning like a million tons. But the Lightning guys like Dusty and Nifty are in favor of APO instead, which does that one specific thing, which makes Lightning like orders of magnitude better. Really excited about that. I'm really excited about cross-input signature aggregation, or I would be if that's a great scaling. That's a no-brainer approach to scaling, but it seems that everyone's abandoned hope that we can ever figure out how to do it. So Blockstream came out with half ag, which is, I don't know, half as good, but hopefully that's good. Long-winded answer, but I'm just pretty, on a practical level, I'm pretty, what's the word? Just jaded, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I've just seen what happened with Lightning. Like, everyone should be running their own node. Like, I worked at Start9 for years, and that whole project was centered around, why is it so hard to run a Lightning node? Why does it take me 2 days to configure a Lightning node to work on top of a Bitcoin Core node? Why am I a developer? Not me, but why are the people running that project? Why is it so difficult to configure LND to work with Bitcoin Core? This should be easy. I know what I'm doing, and it took me 2 days. There's an opportunity here. Let's make an operating system catered for all this stuff. Then everyone will do it. No. No one does it. Like they all just download a wallet from Google Play or the App Store. And
Don't make me think.
Right, exactly. Like it's just, and the irony of it being more expensive to use Lightning than on-chain because you can't set any of this stuff up. So that's basically my thoughts on the process. I don't understand why I'm fighting the Covenants people. I like UTXO sharing conceptually, and I keep getting these red flags yelled at me because they seem to be against all the principles we're espousing here. So, but I don't want to use social heuristics because it's kind of lame. So that's basically where I'm at with it.
Well, it's not for now, but like, how comfortable in the future would you be talking to us about generally scaling issues and Lightning? Because Lightning, you may want everyone to open and run a Lightning node and open channels, but we will get to a point where it's too expensive for some people.
Yeah,
and so it's not a scaling solution for everyone. And there are other things out there, and we've talked to people recently about Liquid and Fedi, etc. At some point, it'd be good to have a conversation with you about that. I think we've done a good stint right now.
Yeah,
we're like 3 hours.
We're nearly
almost.
at 3 hours. Yeah.
What's our longest ever show?
Might be this.
Could it be?
I'm
We've never done
honoured.
3 hours.
I don't think we've ever got 3 hours. You got to get another 20 minutes if you want 3 hours.
I mean, we shouldn't do it for the sake of it. I think
I can manage it. I've had enough coffee that I could. But what are you asking about there?
Well,
though?
it's just, I mean,
I don't want to be endlessly.
Is Lightning a temporary scaling solution that ultimately can't scale because it scales alongside the cost of opening UTXOs?
I think we're fighting against ambivalence. Like people are just lazy and can't be bothered, and like it doesn't. You can have the perfect tech. This is the thing. Like,
I'm not talking about setting up your own node. I'm talking
Okay.
about the cost of opening channels will eventually become
Prohibitive.
Prohibitive, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Like Bitcoin, no one is under the impression, right, that Bitcoin with hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people using it and using on-chain L1 and maybe opening and closing Lightning channels and stuff, no one is under the impression that it can carry on like that with a billion people using it, right? Because it just can't. Like Bitcoin with a billion users is just not the same as Bitcoin with a small group of hardcore cypherpunks and the odd shitcoiner here and there. Like it's just not the same tech. Like, I'm sorry, but like the sad thing is we have to adapt. Like we're going to adapt. Like someone is going to send you Bitcoin from from a Coinbase wallet or some awful thing like that. And you're just going to have to learn to use it. Like we've had these standards before, like BitPay, we're using like this awful standard. Like what was it? Bit 47? No, it wasn't Bit 47. It was Bit 70 or 79.
You could say any number right now.
Right. Yeah, well, someone's going to...
I'm not going to correct you.
Well, I think it was BIP 79, but it was some proprietary standard where, there was some sort of identity mechanism within it. It was part of Bitcoin Core for a while, and I think it got shelved. But like, you can have these things that are like opt-in that people just expect, right? Like proprietary layers built on top of Bitcoin, like, Microsoft browser style, ignoring HTML development and all that. Like you have it with LND. LND kind of approached stuff like that with LNURL and things like that, where you're expected to run a web server and you're not paying any attention to like the protocol layer, like which takes years longer, but it's the robust way to do it. Like that's what they're doing with Bolt 12. It's great. So I don't know. Like I think it just becomes. I really hope it lasts and it survives. But I think, like, again, managing expectations. Like Bitcoin with 1 billion users is not going to be as good as Bitcoin was with, 50,000 users on bitcointalk.org.
Like, what does that mean? Not as good.
It just means that, like, the more... I don't know, like the set of values that the cypherpunk ethos of the whole thing just gets diluted. Like I remember this,
which is why we have ordinals. Maybe
I saw an argument between Toma and Shinobi one time on Twitter, and it was really funny. Shinobi's doing his usual thing of everyone's so fucking dumb and retarded and is stupid and stupid. They're just getting stupider and stupider. And Toma went, eventually Bitcoiners will be of average intelligence. Good point, right? Like, so you're not going to maintain the cypherpunk ethos, and like. People like efficiency. Efficiency is centralized. It's always going to be an uphill burden holding your own keys. Like, even if you make it relatively simple, with, UTXO sharing schemes with a low degree of interactivity, so it's better than Lightning. This is hopefully what Arc enables. I have a channel too, by the way, a YouTube channel. You type Bitcoin mechanic. I did a long interview with Moon Settler where he explains all of this covenant stuff. I don't particularly tend to agree with Moon Settler much, but he's got a really good understanding of the ins and outs of covenants and breaks it all down. I barely understand what he's talking about. But there's not a lot of this stuff around. It's kind of a lot of rosy-cheeked thinking. To me, it's all a bit naive, but it's all theoretically possible. So who knows? I just think, with billions of users, Bitcoin is not the Bitcoin we know it to be today. And it's already just like, look at reality, look at El Salvador, look at Venezuela, look at the wallets they are using. They're not using cold cards and doing cold storage. They're using Android wallets. Some of the time it's totally custodial, even if it's not, even if they're self-custodial with their wallets and they have a mobile wallet that at least gives you your own keys and the third party can't spend your stuff, you still need the third party's permission. You still don't have the privacy, right? Like even if you're using things like Blockstream Green and, cool projects like that, or Phoenix, you still need the permission of those companies to be able to spend your money, right? It's still an undermining of your sovereignty. Like there's custody, but there's also privacy, right? And using Bitcoin privately is hard. And I just think most people have abandoned the concept of that. Like you want to use Chivo, you got to upload an El Salvador phone number, right? So that's not a cypherpunk thing. Already that's a compromise, and it's just kind of unavoidable if you want to make Bitcoin practical to use for a third world population. You're just going to do that.
So do we have to, is there like some realities we have to accept? For Bitcoin for 1 billion people, we have to accept, well, first we demand a base chain which enforces 21 million censorship resistant transactions, UTXOs may be a privilege, but in the future, we're going to have really custodial bank-like services built on layers on top. And look, that's better than what we have now with the banks, but it just comes with some trade-offs. Is that just the reality of the world we're going into? So not everyone is going to be UTXO sovereign, but they're at least going to have a financial system that's built on top of 21 million.
Again, though, it's like the hammer thing. If someone else is using the hammer wrong and you're using it right, it doesn't affect you. But if other people are using custodial Bitcoin and they're using that inside the regular economy, all right, let me ask you, if you add up all the Bitcoins on, Binance, Coinbase, all of the various exchanges around, do you think all of it, plus what people have in cold storage, adds up to 21 million? Or, plus what miners have yet to mine? Or do you think it's already more than 21 million? Is anyone fractionally reserved yet?
Well, you don't know. But history would teach us that it would be unsurprising if we discover one is.
Right. So the only way to have no inflation, like Bitcoin promises on paper, is for everyone to self-custody, and demonstrably people are not doing that. So if there's Bitcoin floating around, because it's like there's a Bitcoin exchange in Canada called ShakePay, and you can just email people money. You have an @ handle, just like Twitter. Like if I want to send some other Canadian person $50 of Bitcoin, I just do it in the app, and it just transfers it inside. There's nothing happening on the blockchain there. I don't know if that Bitcoin really exists or not, but if that becomes part of the regular economy, 21 million becomes less credible. It does by default. Unless everything's touching the base layer, you don't really know whether you have the money or not. And I don't know if that undermines everything or if it's just not as good as it might have been.
Yeah, see, I can't tell if what you're saying is this is a problem we need to solve or this is a reality we need to accept.
Both. That's what I'm saying. Because it's going to be a reality, but I'm not giving up either. We have to fight human complacency and laziness, which is always going to trend towards you deal with it. I can't be bothered. Already in my family, I'm the guy with the private keys. I'm the guy with the contingency plan. I'm the one that spent 5 years that if my Boeing flight crashes on the way home, which is probably 50% odds at this point, like if that happens, my family have got to figure out how to get all the private keys back. And like you're saying with your son, with this Bitcoin literacy, he can do that. I'm saying they've all just shirked that responsibility to me, and I've gone, great, right? So now I have to have multiple safes in different continents where they have to get together and like resurrect all this stuff, along with written instructions about how to do it that works with Trezor software as it was in 2016 when I made the plan. Like, this is a nightmare to me. Like the 99% chances they just get locked out and the Bitcoin's gone forever, because I have to have a trade-off between I need to make sure no one can access this stuff while I'm alive and just steal my money. So like, I forget what point I'm making here. I'm saying like people, even today, people are just opting for convenience and you deal with it for me. And I'm sorry, there's just too many custodians out there that are willing to say, just leave your Bitcoin on the exchange. You know, people with elaborate multi-sig setups have locked themselves out of their coins more than they've been robbed, right? And people are scared. People don't want the responsibility. And unless everyone else takes responsibility for verifying that their UTXOs are genuine and keeping all their money in their own UTXOs, the 21 million thing just becomes less and less credible. Though I think Lynn Alden made this point as well, and she's right. The closer the easier it is to verify, the less possible it is to go off the edge of the cliff with fake Bitcoin in the economy that isn't real. Like the fact that you're always one step away from being able to withdraw from Coinbase and it's a real UTXO, that makes it harder for them to artificially inflate it. It's not like gold, where you can have so much more gold floating around in the economy than really is existing in vaults. With Bitcoin, because it's easier to like withdraw it and verify it, there's less play, there's less wiggle room they've got to create fake Bitcoin.
It might be like planes, with the planes where they oversell the seats.
Right.
It might be like, well, we can get away with 10% here because we're not going to have 90, like BlackRock. I'm not saying they're going to, but they said we can inflate by 10%, or we can steal 10% because we know we're not going to have a 90, like a 95% drawdown. So you might get people who play that game. It's like, what can I get? How much can I get? How fractional can I get away with?
Yeah. So I think Bitcoin, you can't get away with that much fractional, because if people start to smell something fishy and they withdraw from the and whatever exchange it is, that's there, and then very quickly they disable withdrawals or something, that they don't really have the Bitcoin they're pretending to, right?
Yeah.
So
FTX.
Right. I mean, there's been, you name it, Quadriga, Mt. Gox, there's just a laundry list. But that's also my ironic, like Hail Mary on this whole thing, is that the more people get robbed, the more people learn to use it correctly. Like, this is the paradox that I find most fun in Bitcoin. We could probably round off with this point, actually. So it's anti-fragility thrives. It doesn't just like survive adversarial environments. It needs them. It needs them to thrive. It's like Andreas Antonopoulos' old analogy with Bubble Boy and the sewer rat, I think the video's called. It's like the kid that grows up pampered, getting cleaned and washed every day, has no immune system and will just get wiped out by the first thing. Whereas the kid that grows up like filthy, playing around in the earth and all that stuff, has a well-calibrated immune system and all that stuff. So Bitcoin grows up in the wild and gets attacked, and that keeps taking out the central points of failure, and it gets strong. So Mt. Gox collapsing wasn't just something we shrugged off. It literally taught the whole community, not your keys, not your coins. It entrenched this very, very sovereign mindset. It was valuable. Like developers going kind of rogue. When people come into Bitcoin and they say, who controls Bitcoin Core? It's like, well, we've had a developer go rogue before and try and force on something the network didn't want. And we shrugged it off. That inspires confidence. It encourages people to be vigilant about what goes on in Bitcoin Core. So survive exchange collapses. We survive rogue developers. We survive governments attacking miners, right? What happens if the government comes along in China where all the mining happens and bans it? Easy. We shrugged that off, and we've shown you that we can survive that. And it makes people have this sort of, they take it seriously, and they know in it, it's not just decentralized in theory, right? Like, we've demonstrated that this thing can survive it, but it has to stay under attack. Otherwise people go, oh, I'll just leave all my money on some custodial wallet. No, you need to get robbed when that happens, so that you're like, well, I can't do this. Like, so we need bad things to keep happening. Otherwise people just get lazy. Back to a USA analogy, right? Like, US Constitution is born out of tyranny, right? We don't want to pay the taxes. We are going to declare independence. We're not going to ask for it. And, as long as it's granted to us, we'll live with that value set. No, we have to actually be reminded. And when when you're not under attack, when tyranny is not there, all this crap starts to creep in. There's disrespect for gun rights and disrespect for property rights, and they all just creep in and weeds come in. It's like people don't respect freedom unless their freedom's under attack, and people don't respect their sovereignty in Bitcoin unless they keep getting robbed. So, like, you just need these awful things to happen. Others people just lose respect for the foundations of the system. So that's the end. That's all I'm going to say.
There we go. All right. Do you want to send people anywhere?
Yeah. So this ostensibly is about Ocean, though. I mean, somehow Ocean, like I said, is like the figurehead of the anti-spam attack, even though our ultimate goal is for you to put whatever you want in blocks. Kind of ironic. But Ocean.xyz, that's the mining pool I work for. It's a Bitcoin mining pool. It isn't trying to get a bunch of, money from whatever shitcoins we can stuff inside Bitcoin, which is increasingly the approach of all the other pools. It's permissionless. You shouldn't need to make an account or upload government ID to mine in a pool. And outside of the large pools, the biggest options you have right now for mining, Foundry and Antpool, proudly KYC, right? I think in Foundry's case, they're not proud about it, but they're regulated. If you want to mine with these people, you need to have government ID and all that stuff. Ocean's permissionless. We can't stop you making as many accounts as you want because we don't know who you are. There is no account model. You just put a Bitcoin address in your miner. You shouldn't need permission to mine, and we shouldn't. You should have transparency about your payouts, all that stuff. But that's Ocean.xyz. Me personally, I'm on Twitter at grassfed Bitcoin, and
YouTube.
I'm on YouTube. If you just search for Bitcoin Mechanic as one word, I haven't done a video in like 6 months, but at some point I'll make another one along. I was going to do a video on spam recently, but I thought this is a much better idea.
Your point is about this.
Well, I think like 500 people see it if it's on my channel, and maybe 500,000 people see it if it's on yours. So.
Well, I'd hope so. 500. I'm not sure that many, but well, listen, look, we will shove that all in the show notes. Anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so.
You hardened now for the revolution, Danny boy.
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
All right.
What can I say? Absolutely love this. I said to Danny beforehand, I think you're going to really enjoy this. I knew I would. Based on 5 minutes with you in Madeira. And then I watched the Preston interview, and I know it would. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for keeping it simple for the audience. Appreciate you coming on. I look forward to when we record again. I think this is great. And it's also it's always good to get another British voice on.
Yeah, for sure.
Speak a little bit more. We're civilized, a bit more clarity.
We celebrate America, but really, they shouldn't have done that.
You've been sitting out your little teacup all episode.
You were out of order.
Yeah.
Look at your taxes now, bitch. Thanks, man, and thank you everyone for listening. We have Eric Yates and Vortex in the room. I think we're going to go and get some dinner soon. Enjoy the Las Vegas lights. Thanks, everyone. Bye.